Chapter 4, The Gymnasium Days. Dinner was quieter than the night before, though not by much. The refectory still buzzed with quiet clatter and muttered prayer fragments, but the weight in my legs and chest kept me grounded. I found Brask and Marcy at their usual table, and they waved me over without ceremony. Brask sniffed once and gave me a sharp-toothed grin. "You look less like a corpse today. That is good. That means you survived the Gnosis, yes?" Marcy raised a brow over her tray. "You didn't puke blood, did you?" "No. Not yet," I said. I didn't mention the part where I shook through half the day and might still be tingling slightly on the inside. "I'm a compass now," I said it plainly. Brask huffed, satisfied. "Compass is a supportive role, yes?" Brask would never support. "But you are good to see you're worth supporting, Brask." Marcy elbowed him, not gently. "He means congratulations. I took the needle crown, if you needed to be told. But oddly enough, Compass is a good fit. You might get added to our team." "Team?" She glanced sideways at Brask. Something flickered between them. "We just lost our lantern." Brask snorted but didn't meet my eyes. She was too good for the church. A silence settled for a breath, not long enough to deepen. Marcy filled it with chewing. Brask spoke into it like he couldn't bear it. "But yes, missions with a compass would be amazing." It was the closest thing to softness I figured I would get from him. The rest of dinner drifted on with less tension. Brask returned to full form, teasing me about the hell I had conscripted myself into. "You will see what a sewer tribe does to a growing knoll. We are the strongest and most resilient, yes? We eat the weak and swim in the muck before we even open our eyes." "Yeah, because living in the sewers is what makes people strong," Marcy said, rolling her eyes. "Yes. It does. You soft topwalkers have lungs of fungus." Marcy leaned over and stage whispered, "Don't listen to him. He got kicked out of the sewer tribe for losing at mud wrestling." "Lies. I left on a tour of conquest. The banter was dumb, and it didn't make the food taste better, but it made it easier to finish eating. I left early, excused myself with a fake yawn, though I didn't lie about wanting rest. I did read more, eyes tracing the same diagrams again and again. My mind spun with plans. The anchoring ritual had changed something. Not just around me, but inside. I hadn't told anyone, but I felt like a tautness in the center of my chest. Something had settled there. Something vast. I stared at my ceiling for a long time. When sleep took me, it was slow and light, but it didn't fight me. The next morning came with a sound like someone trying to collapse the door by force. "Up," Brask shouted. It wasn't a suggestion. I pulled on my overshirt, half-buttoned, and opened the door. Brask was already halfway down the hall. "Today we make something of you." We returned through Horace Yard, the halls more familiar now. No one gave us much attention. Training had resumed, it seemed everyone bustled about with tasks today. Brask brought me back to the same chamber we had used before, the stone still stained with old chalk and sweat. He didn't let me ease into it. Drills started at once. Posture, stride, pivots. Brask corrected everything. When I dropped a shoulder, he was there to slap it straight. When I lagged on stance recovery, he swept my legs. I hit the floor more times than I could count. "No good, no good. Your weight is everywhere. You fight like a shopping bag in event." He barked orders between demonstrations, each one efficient, brutal, precise. "Watch the feet. Balance comes from there, not the arms. Your spine is a rope bridge right now. Fix it." It reminded me of my lacrosse coach again, but from hell. When I gasped and bent double, he slapped between my shoulders. "Breath with your chest, boy. Inflate your ribs like armor. Now start again." We only stopped when my limbs no longer obeyed. I collapsed backward, eyes fluttering. Brask crouched over me, sniffed, and then clapped. "Good. You almost died," he laughed. "Now we do real work." I stared at him from the floor. "That wasn't real?" He snorted. "That was a warm-up, no? Now we spar." He hauled me up by one arm like I was weightless. My vision sparked for a second, but I nodded. He handed me a dull staff, no ornament. "We call this lesson, how not to die. Not how to fight. Because you cannot fight the mighty Brask." He swung before I was ready. I caught it on instinct, the shaft vibrating in my hands. Good. But too slow. Again. Brask was stronger than any person I had ever met. It wasn't just muscle. He moved like water, like a sprung trap, like something made for the sharp end of combat. Null or not, he was a predator. I was not. But he didn't hold back. That was the lesson. He beat it into me through repetition, through pressure, through angles I didn't know existed. You must learn to move before the thought arrives. You see? You must let the nerves guide the body before the mind catches up. That caught me off guard. He pressed forward, fast again, and I sidestepped. My feet moved first. Brask smiled with all his teeth. Yes. Like that. We sparred until my legs went out again, and then he let me sit. The edge of my vision pulsed with gray. He handed me water without comment. I drank it all. Not bad for a first dance, he said, crouching beside me. But if you like your smile, train and pack a gun. Noted, I said. He grunted happily. Tomorrow. Gun training. The real fun begins. Brask stood, stretching his arms behind his back, bones cracking like logs in a furnace. I stayed on the floor a little longer, heartbeat finally steadying. Brask didn't give me a break after that. The moment I caught my breath, he threw me right back into sparring. We drilled and fought and circled until my body was jelly and my skin slick with sweat. Only when the hour grew late and the distant bell signaled the approach of dinner did he finally let me go. I staggered to the washroom, barely able to lift my arms to scrub the worst of the grime away, but I made myself clean. Still, I had other plans. Quiet ones. Plans that began in ritual. In magic. Dinner was the same as it had been. Familiar trays, familiar buzz of muted conversation, familiar smell of something rehydrated and slightly spiced. Brask was in a rare mood, bragging loudly to no one in particular. He did not fall today until after the third hour, Brask announced as I set my tray down beside him. A great improvement. Very soon, he may even hit me on purpose. Marcy raised a brow. Wow. Next thing you know, he'll be asking to lead formation. He should. That way, Brask can guard from the rear and make jokes about his posture. I grinned, too tired to care how ridiculous it sounded. My muscles still burned from the abuse, but the ache was settling into something more bearable. Endurance. Or maybe just numbness. We ate in a quiet rhythm. There was a kind of peace in the repetition. I found myself falling into it, not resisting for once. I could tell Marcy and Brask were at ease too. Their banter carried a practiced cadence, a safe territory of jabs and mock insults. But something in the way Brask glanced at her lingered longer than usual. It wasn't possessive or clumsy. More like he was waiting for something she hadn't said yet. She caught me looking and wrinkled her nose. What? Nothing, I said. Just enjoying the show. Brask beamed. You are learning to spot the nuance of Brask's greatness. This is good. We all laughed at that. I lingered a little after, but not long. My tray was cleaned and returned. My legs knew the path back to my room without thinking. I had planned to pore back over the ritual texts again, maybe even attempt a refinement of the anchoring rite with adjustments from the saint's marginalia. But I didn't. The second I sat on the cot, soft, yes, I had come to accept that now, soft enough, I didn't even make it to lying down. I closed my eyes, meaning to rest them, and the next thing I knew the room was vibrating under Brask's knock. Up. We are late already. You think the Puritans allow 2 days off? I dragged myself up with every bone protesting and dressed one arm at a time. By the time I reached the door, Brask was already halfway down the hall. Drills resumed without mercy. The same chamber, the same sweat-stained stone, the same tempo of blows, balance checks, and corrections. But today, I noticed my feet didn't lag as badly. My shoulders didn't sag quite so fast. I could follow a form through the full motion before collapsing. Brask noticed too. Yes. You are still weak, but now you are weak with structure. He demonstrated a tight pivot and made me repeat it 20 times. A frame must be built before you hang armor on it. Skill and experience shall be your armor, yes? When I faltered, he barked out angles. Lead with the hips. The spine is your line of sight. The wrist is the hinge, not the lever. And when I lost focus, he swept my legs again. Still too soft. Your mind floats. Anchor it, compass, he said the last word with a mocking tease. It was grueling. And somehow, it was working. We broke just before midday. He allowed me to stumble to the side and drink from the tin water cup while he sat with one leg up on the ledge, watching the dust shift in the artificial light. Next part. Guns. I looked up, blinking. Now? Now, he said, tossing me a stained cloth to wipe my hands. You must learn to die slower. Firearms are our most common tool outside the walls. We moved to a long hall, different from the sparring room. This one had armored slats and recessed compartments. Brask unlocked a crate from the corner and retrieved 2 training firearms coil action, low charge. Blunted but heavy. He handed me one with no ceremony. Standard issue coil gun. Base model. No upgrades, no flair. It's ugly, but it shoots straight. And boy was it ugly, it reminded me of the gun that Stallone used in the Dread movie. Only it was older and more beat to shit. He started with the basics, the frame, the safety, and the little contact that charges the round when you fire. Then he gave me practice rounds, plain iron shells with a single contact dot. You do not need elegance yet. You need rhythm. Grip, brace, aim, breathe. The first time I pulled the trigger, it kicked like a spasm and slammed back into my shoulder. Brask barked laughter. Yes. Gun does not love you yet. You must court it. Learn how she dances, yes. He showed me, 3 quick shots, crisp and close. Controlled. Efficient. You don't need heart, out beyond the walls, yes. He said. Hit what ends the noise, yes. If you get one shot, pick that one. What? End it fast, he said. Then make it quiet. Then you be quieter still. I tried again. Dozens of rounds later, my wrists ached and my palms stung, but the shots started to group. Brask didn't praise often, and when he did it landed like a verdict. You could die second, he said. That is not bad. From him, that was almost kind. We drilled until the light shifted and the inner bell sounded. Brask checked a wall panel and nodded. Time for food. Wash first. You stink of mortal effort, and laughed as if he wasn't the same. I staggered to the washing room and let the water sluice over my arms and shoulders. My hands shook. I dried them and dressed slowly, muscle memory returning just enough to make it out to the refectory. Dinner was more of the same. But I wasn't. Plans still whispered beneath the sweat and ache. Rituals, maps, the compass in my chest spinning slow and bright. Brask was shaping this body, but I was shaping something else. When I returned to my room, the corridor felt long, the halls unusually hushed as though the walls were holding their breath for me. The tile underfoot still hummed with the faint memory of Brask's earlier drills, but I was done being pushed for now. I needed quiet. I needed the Book of Saints. I needed to believe that all of this could be shaped, learned, and maybe even bent. The cot creaked as I sat down. I didn't bother with changing or cleaning up, not yet. The lamp flew on low and dim settings while it buzzed faintly when I tapped it on. Warm, yellow light bathed the page, and the room narrowed down to just me and the book I had hidden under my folded uniform. There was no sense of uniformity to the volume. Some pages were on soft vellum, others on brown pulp paper that cracked when I turned them. The ink bled in places and turned metallic in others. The pages didn't match. Some were careful and neat, lined with ruled borders and footnotes and red. Others looked like they had been written on a knee while running. All of them, though, were marked with a single name in the margin, Saint Nerea. I slid down on the cot and drew my knees up onto the blanket, letting it form a tent between me and the rest of the room. It was a posture I hadn't taken since I was a kid sneaking comics during storms. The world outside could think I was asleep. The first full line I could read said, "Ask small, or the world answers in thunder." The corner of the page was missing, cleanly torn. A wedge of absence where she must have explained why. I turned the page. Nerea wrote in images. "Sheath your breath. Under the market, the pipes sing at night." I was lost there. I did not ask, "How do I live?" I asked, "Which stair is true?" A coin fell above me and struck the third rung. I climbed and came out under a blue awning. The story had no preamble. The date line beneath it was scorched brown. Someone had tried to burn it, or maybe something else had. I asked for tools when I should have asked for a way out. Next to the line, she drew a small hand with a crooked thumb. It looked more like a doodle than a glyph. "If you are patient, dust will settle and point the way. Old bricks keep the memory of passing feet. Treat the past with care." The ink bled out near the end, as if wiped with a damp sleeve. The page shimmered slightly where the water had warped the paper. The next few entries changed tone. They shortened. The lines came clipped, the strokes heavy. "Do not speak names while you look." Above the second crown, "Things start listening back." The phrase "listening back" was underlined 3 times. The underline broke at the end where the page had ripped again. She listed portents of divination she trusted. Salt that clings to one tile. A shadow that refuses to move with the lamp. A draft that comes with no vents. The next page listed signs she vowed never to trust again. Only the first 2 lines were still legible. Answers that praise you. Faces that resemble someone you loved as a child. Later she wrote about cost. When you look too far, something looks back. Pay before you ask, not with trinkets, but with care. Ask for one step, not the whole road. Keep your eyes on the sign, not on the sky behind it. Close the window when you are done. Wipe the mirror clean. Speaker release. If you linger, the watchers notice. If you stare, they stare back. Near the end she recorded a field test without names. Many eyes watched the block. I did not ask for a cloak. I asked for 1 minute in which no one would think to look up. The train screamed at the crossing. A vendor dropped his tray. A child cried out. Every head turned. I crossed the boundaries and was gone. A red fleck sat beside the period. I could not tell whether it was ink or dried blood. The last page was thin like onion skin, and the handwriting leaned hard to the right. When you reach for large answers, large minds reach back. Do not hunt for their fingerprints. You will not like where they appear. I will write a list of safe questions for the higher crowns. The line stopped there. The next leaf was missing, and the loose threads of the binding showed. I sat with it for a long moment, then closed the book and pressed it to my chest. The lamp hummed like a fly caught behind glass. This was too exciting. I was about to do more magic. Real magic. Not theory. Not cold reading psychology or tarot TikToks or urban legends about shadow people on the edge of sleep paralysis. No candles that smelled like cleaning fluid and made you feel more ridiculous than enlightened. Not a long post on a forum that said it would open your third eye if you fasted and recited phonemes from a dead alphabet. No. This was real. This was mine. Not wizardry, exactly. Not tech either. Something between. Something closer to software that bled when you compiled it wrong. A ritual art made from induction coils and prayers, soldered glyphs and bodily cost. It was all very clear and extremely not. I didn't understand it, not really. But I had seen it work. I had done it. That anchored circle in my room had responded. It had bent space. I had made something happen that would never be allowed to happen on Earth. And now, it is happening again. My pulse fluttered. My breath caught like I was 13 again and about to watch an R-rated movie for the first time without permission. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. Somewhere under the flush of awe and fascination, something small and rational remembered what Ka-Uru had said about crown sickness. And then there was the higher problem, the one Saint Neria had warned of. Beyond a certain height in this system, something began to notice you. Ultimate knowledge condensed into a malevolent being. An Archon. Drunk on god blood. Disdainful of its own design. A thing of pure awareness watching the wrong angles. But even knowing that, I still chose to act. The greed won. I reset the anchor circle. I aligned the copper-traced plates and plugged in the cooling jacket to the induction coil. The buzz of heat-wicking hum filled the room, low and slow. Then, I lowered myself into the circle, back straight, breath shallow. My ritual was not of this room. I was reaching deeper. With the right scaffold, with the circle tuned and keyed to the ritual threads I had tied to myself before, the palace answered. It did not happen all at once. The circle triggered, the sigils lit, and the domain pulled me under. It was slower than before. Smoother. Less jarring. The palace returned. This time, I was not a guest. I sat upon the throne. It was massive. Regal. Part gold and sandstone, part etched brass, with circuit-laced inlays that shimmered under the skyless light. The structure around me had formed itself like a hallucination born of symmetry and ambition. Everything was shaped in hyperstructure and impossible geometry, coiled and sweeping with style that felt both Egyptian and something even older. Columns as tall as office towers rose in rows of 13, bearing massive arches that rippled like latticework coral. The walls carried murals of gold leaf and lacquer, each depicting constellations and ritual threads stitched into diagrams I could barely comprehend. Somewhere between fresco and PCB. And it was mine. The table I summoned in front of me was long. Regal. Detailed like a circuit trace rendered as furniture. It hummed gently with the outline of ritual intention, the scaffolding lines matching those in my notes. I laid the components out. Each sourced from the pages of Saint Neria's scrawled diagrams, adjusted slightly where newer texts contradicted. This was not just a continuation of the anchoring ritual. This was a shield. I could feel the weight of the domain above me now. Not the palace. The true domain. The sky. The attention. Something vast quivered above it all. Like I had stirred beneath a lid. Like something peered down through frost-thin glass. I was a gnat. That was the image that stuck. A gnat buzzing just loud enough to make the predator aware. Even a gnat eventually gets swatted. I needed protection. The ritual on the table was not defensive in the way a wall might be. No force fields. No armor. This was spiritual shielding. The ritual notes referred to it as an invocation. A dedication. A warding through shared alignment. The theory was simple: if the Archon that watched could be invoked, then so too could the aspects of its body. You could, through deliberate pattern and promise, veil yourself beneath a specific part of the dreamer's anatomy. Cloaked in it. Hidden by its function. I wasn't sure what that really meant. The newer text said invoke the wing or hide in the shoulder. I was expected to pick a body part. That seemed insane. But it was what the diagrams implied. The most obvious choices felt too obvious. The heart, the mouth, the brain, the spine. All those were things I assumed others would choose. Places already crowded, watched. Important and thus more visible. So I strolled. The ceiling trembled faintly. I couldn't tell if the movement was in the stone or just in the haze of my perception. But it was there. The same instinct that tells you when someone stares. The same animal fear that crouched low and urged me to stay still. I needed a part no one would notice. Something important enough to matter, but subtle enough to be overlooked. Ovaries. I don't know why the thought struck me. Maybe because no one talks about them. Maybe because it felt just specific and strange enough to not be crowded with petitioners. Maybe because in a dreamer, a creator, the organs of creation would hold immense power. Self-contained. Self-propagating. Coded. Forgotten. I whispered it aloud. Ovaries. Nothing happened. No shock. No ritual feedback. No glyphs lighting. Just the same low hum from the table. I leaned forward, rereading the diagrams. Cross-referencing the rituals. Then I remembered Saint Neria's pages. The water-damaged ones. The ones that had been smudged and scrawled. I pulled the book to me in the domain. In this place, all things I had bound to myself could follow. I reread the damaged passage. The ink was warped, but enough remained. Begin with form rather than speech. Draw one slow breath, hold it lightly, and fix the seal's image in your mind until every line stands still. When the shape is steady, speak the name that belongs to that shape, and let the sound follow the form. Keep your attention on the image on high while you speak, and do not let your thoughts wander. If your skin shivers, take it as a sign that the gate has answered the image. When a faint mist gathers at your teeth with a taste like iron, begin the full invocation and complete it without pause. Only when the final syllable settles may you release your breath and close the vision. I adjusted my posture and focused. Meditation was not new to me. After lacrosse practice I had used it to cool down, steady my pulse, and keep my head clear before homework. I started the same way now. I set my feet flat, uncrossed my arms, and let my shoulders drop. I drew a slow breath in for 4 counts, held it for 4, and released it for 4. I repeated the cycle until the restless edge in my chest softened. I scanned my body from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet, naming each place without judgment. Jaw, throat, chest, ribs, hips, knees, ankles. When I found tension, I let the breath move through it until it loosened. I closed my eyes only after the world around me stopped pulling at my attention. I placed the seal's image at the center of my mind like a coin laid on still water. I checked every line and curve the way I had once checked my stick and gloves before a game. When the image held steady, I paired it with a simple count. 1 for the outer ring, 2 for the inner ring, 3 for the crossing line, 4 for the point of rest. I let the count become a rhythm that matched my breath. I kept my gaze soft behind my eyelids so I would not chase stray thoughts. If my mind wandered, I brought it back the way I used to bring my focus back to the ball, not with force, but with practice. Only then did I put a voice to the work. I let the sound follow the shape I was holding rather than lead it. I spoke the name that belonged to that shape on an even breath, neither loud nor soft, and I finished the syllables in a single clean line. I kept the image steady through the sound and did not hurry the ending. When a faint taste like iron touched my tongue and the hairs along my arms rose, I knew the attention I had invited was near and measured. I thought of the ritual. Not just its steps, but its shape. I visualized the line of invocation. The dreamer's vast anatomy mapped through the lines. My plea, not spoken but impressed upon the domain like a seal pressed into wax. The image of the dreamer's ovaries became a symbol in my mind, spiraled, veined, recessed within sacred Vesica shapes. Protective. Potent. Forgotten by design. And I offered myself there. The mist began. It bled outward from my eyes, dark crimson. Not smoke. Not fog. Something subtler. Steam from deep memory. It pooled, rose, and streamed upward, striking the invisible ceiling of the throne room. It wrapped the perimeter. It circled the throne. Then it pulsed. Once. Then again. The fog stabilized into a shell. And the trembling in the sky stopped. I breathed out. I had done it. I had wanted to hide, and the dreamer, or whatever splintered corpse of it still lay in wait above the crown tiers, had allowed me. I was cloaked. I could think I had time again. And this was just the beginning of my exploits. I was vaguely aware that time was passing at a reduced rate in the real world. My body still sat there, cross-legged on the bare tile, posture fixed in the breathless shape of meditation. I could feel it, although I could not see it, the weight in my knees and the stiffness in my hands. Inside the domain, however, I had no such limits. I could think with my full mind and act without friction or delay. It was a useful trick, not a cheat, but a secret. I could work for hours here, let the outer world slip past, research what I needed, prepare what I could, build what mattered, and plan what came next. When I returned, no one would know how far I had gone. Tricks, however, have limits, and tricks alone do not shape reality. If I wanted to survive this world, let alone escape it, I needed more than a place to hide. I needed tools, and I needed foresight. I needed divination. The little book of mending held more than the beginner's rights. I had skimmed the primer before, light theory, clean work, and the precepts of safe cost. Now I read further, past the index and past the pillars, down into the rights themselves. The first was a scrying right, but something about it seemed wrong in the space and I chose to trust it. Further down, the book explained secondary variations, a beginner's divination deck called a Digi-Tarot encoded with low-level symbols, images, and scrap patterns designed to resonate with early scaffold imprints. Simple enough to mock up with recycled foil and a printer. Another method used a widget pendant loaded with Enochic scripts, attuned to generate feedback pulses when placed near specific encoded anchors. These could be city signs, tower bleeds, or body signals. It required some know-how, but the reward was cleaner results. I took notes. The difference between these methods wasn't power. It was focus. The more personally keyed the tool, the stronger the signal. But only if the question was clean. That part kept coming up. Ask Small, Saint Nuri I had written. Or the world answers in thunder. It made me nervous. But I still wanted to try. I flipped again through the Book of Mending, committing more of the right structure to memory. In my domain, I had the time. I could build a table of correspondence. I could map the symbols against my own notes. I could summon foil and brass, digital readers, induction clips, salt. Whatever I had touched, whatever I had keyed to my anchor, I could bring. As I stretched the limits of my new mind, I felt it pull in ways my old body would never have allowed. It wasn't just faster. It was broader. As if there were thoughts now that had always been there, just beyond the veil of language or training, and only now did I have the musculature to flex them. I wasn't thinking in words anymore. Not only. I was thinking in diagrams. In circuits. In mirrored spatial logic and stacks of inference layered like code, layered like prayer. It was time. The domain welcomed me. My ritual throne pulsed faintly with residual shielding, the crimson mist still circling high above like a memory of blood smoke. The table was already reset. I had summoned the proper effects from memory and bound ritual. I could feel the corresponding motions play out in my physical body far away. There, back in the lamp-lit quiet of my assigned cell, my real hands prepared the rite. Here, in the palace of mind, I worked with pure concentration. It wasn't like the old world decks. It wasn't paper or cardboard, no velvet mat or hand-painted iconography. The Digi-Tarot was stored in the ether and mists around me. Its glyphs appeared across a projected field of red etch and blue light. They shimmered faintly as they hovered in geometric suspension, charged with gnosis and the faintest aroma of ozone. I had followed the preparation exactly. Chalked the plate. Activated the coil. Drew the resonance node to load the deck. 42 glyph primes. 22 major loci. 4 suits, 6 layers of computation. It built itself like a breath held long, then exhaled into clarity. The projection stabilized. My heart thudded. I knew what I wanted to ask. Had known for a while. But saying it aloud, even just here, even just in this thought place that was mine alone, felt too raw. I reached for the input node and typed it anyway. Is there a way to go home? The deck shimmered. The stack shuffled. From the pulsing light, 7 cards spun out. They settled slowly into a spread across the ritual table. My breath caught. First position, the Fool, reversed. The hollow projection showed a figure stepping off the edge of a shattered bridge, backpack open, contents scattering like seeds. The reversed position pulsed right at its corners. My mind interpreted without thought. Naivety exposed. A leap made without preparation. A journey undertaken blind. You are no longer protected by ignorance. Second position, the Tower. Upright. A spire breaking under bolt strike. Glyphs of entropy flared at the edges. The meaning was stark. Destruction. Collapse of structure. What you left behind has fallen. I swallowed. Third position, 8 of signals. Upright. A line of distant radio towers. All lit. All pointing. The suite of signals dealt with paths, messages, contact. Momentum. Unexpected movement. Information gained in flight. You will learn something that moves you faster than expected. The signal has changed. Fourth position, the Hierophant. Reversed. A crowned, mirrored priest. But upside down. Glitches flickered at the eyes. Faith and error. A false guide. Texts out of order. The answer you seek is not in present. Fifth position, Knight of Wires. Upright. A figure on a pulse spike, blade drawn, trailing sparks. Wires are the suit of will, of action, of direct consequence. Quick action. Precision. A chance to cut through a tangle. But only if you act when the opening comes. Delay, and it will be gone. Sixth position, the Star. Upright. Soft light. A woman pouring water across a map of stars. Peace, clarity, distant guidance. Hope. Long-term potential. My throat went dry. Seventh and final position, the World. Inverted. A hollow ring. A void eating its own tail. Rotating in place. Completion denied. Full circle interrupted. Hope is a loop you cannot close. Not yet. The world is not finished with you. The spread stopped glowing. The cards held for 10 more seconds, then folded back into the projection. The table dimmed. I sat in the silence. The ritual table had gone cold. The coil had long since powered down. Mist still clung faintly to the vaulted ceiling of my domain, fading at the edges like a thought I didn't want to forget. I kept staring at the spread. The deck had been digital, its projections fed through an induction prism. The question I asked remained glowing on the interface: is there a way to go home? It hadn't said no. But it hadn't said yes. What it offered instead was something incomplete. Open-ended. A circuit yet not closed. I watched the last flickers of the final card fade from the air. My throne buzzed beneath me like it still held charge. I wasn't done thinking about it. Divination wasn't exact. Maybe I had asked too much. Maybe the question itself had been too large. Or maybe that had been the point. I rested my hand on the arm of the throne, listening to the hum. My mind kept circling back to the first card drawn. The Fool. That had scared me more than I wanted to admit. Of all the possible openings, why that one? 1 in 78. And not just upright reversed. Had I made a mistake? What was the tower doing there, halfway through the spread? That card didn't whisper. It screamed. If my body had died back on Earth, if I had been severed from any hope of return, wouldn't that be the tower? Collapse. Destruction. Revelation by force. And yet, following it came the 8 of signals. A card of swift changes. Did the Fool force this card? Did my actions set myself up for great change? Then the Hierophant reversed. My throat tightened. Was that supposed to be a warning? Was the reversed Hierophant the symbol of false faith? Were the English books I'd read St. Uriah's work meant to be seen as suspect? Was that what the Fool had warned me of? Or was it the opposite? Was the Fool me, stumbling in head first? Was the Hierophant a mask dropped, not a lie revealed? I had no way to know. But the final card had been the World. And it had been clean. That, I felt, was truth. Whatever this place had planned for me, it was not done yet. My head began to ache. At first it was a low rumble behind my eyes, like the dull throb of dehydration or bad sleep. Then it grew into pressure that pulsed as if my skull were vibrating from the inside out. I tried to breathe through it, but the pain escalated too quickly. It crested like a breaking wave, and it threw me out of the trance. I gasped. The throne was gone. The palace is gone. The copper ring on the floor still glowed faintly, but the ritual had collapsed. I had been shunted out. I blinked. My eyes stung. Heat pooled under my lashes. I reached up to wipe them. My fingers came away red. Blood. It was running from the corners of both eyes. I blinked again, harder this time. The sting burned deeper, but it faded fast. I wiped the rest away and stared down at the back of my hand. Crimson. Not much, but more than a nosebleed. Okay, I whispered aloud. My voice cracked with excitement, or was it fear? I gathered the ritual materials and texts from the table and floor, careful to close each binding and not leave any plates active. I placed them all in the corner of the room on the spare cloth I kept folded near the cot. Then I cleaned the blood from my face as best I could. I returned to the cot. I was exhausted. Not just physically. Mentally. My thoughts churned, my limbs trembled, And under it all was that raw, trembling shiver of awe. The kind that didn't go away. I had done it. My first real divination. And it worked. The cards had told me something my waking mind could never have known. Had they really? Part of me still doubted. But another part, a deeper part, the one that felt things in its spine and ribs and gut, believed. I pressed the little book of mending to my chest. I hadn't meant to fall asleep that way, but I did. I curled into the cot, still half wrapped in the ritual haze. The smell of copper and old paper thickened the air. I don't remember dreaming. But I woke to Brask's voice. Muffled through the door, but unmistakable. "Well, come on, Monk. Are you gonna force me to punish you again?" I groaned. My eyes were crusted but not bleeding. That was a win. I sat up and wiped my face, then dressed quickly in the second pair of robes. We were only issued two, and the first set still stank of heat and salt and whatever lingered in the air after 2 days of exercise. "Open the door." Brask stood there, arms crossed, tail twitching. He grinned. "Ah. So you can wake yourself, no? Thought maybe I'd have to flip the cot." I grunted and rubbed my temple. "Don't tempt me to fake sleep next time." "No faking," he said, stepping back. "Too much work to flip. Better to drag. Come. The gym calls." The air in Horace Yard was sharper this morning. Not cold. Never cold down here. But fresh, in a way that made my lungs remember outdoor wind. That made my ears prick for birds that wouldn't come. Brask set a brutal pace through the halls. "Your footwork still shames worms," he said as we passed the chapel junction. "We will fix that." "Yes?" Training began the moment we crossed into the ring. No warm-up. No lecture. Brask simply tossed me a padded baton and moved to the far side of the circle. "Today," he said, crouching low, "we practice what to do when dying." "Yes? Since you can only die for now." "That's encouraging," I said. He lunged. The baton in my hand wasn't heavy, but it felt useless against the speed he moved with. I barely brought it up in time to deflect the first blow. The second cracked into my ribs before I had fully turned. "If your ribs cry," Brask said, stepping back, "tell them to toughen up. Yes?" I wheezed and stepped toward him, sloppy and predictable. He punished me with a feint and a hook to the shoulder that left my arm numb for a count of 5. We reset, and we went again. It did not get easier. But I got less bad. My steps no longer tripped over themselves. My breath came in shorter bursts, but I didn't collapse. By the time Brask called a pause, I could barely feel my legs. He crouched beside me as I knelt, hands on knees. "You will see," he said. "You are not strong. Not fast. Not yet. But you are stubborn. This will serve you." I nodded, too tired to speak. He slapped my back once, then pointed to the bench where the water sat. "Drink. Rest, then we train more, yes?" The latter half of the day was drills. Coil pistol. Safety, draw, squeeze, reset. Again. Brask was a different kind of instructor when it came to the coil. With hand to hand he shouted and danced and bragged. With guns, he got quiet, ears down. "Stop staring at the muzzle," Brask said. "Set your feet. Square your hips. Bring the sights to your eye, do not drop your head. Pick one point on the target and stay with it. Breathe out. Hold the last of the breath. Press the trigger straight back. Do not slap it. Do not chase the shot after it breaks. Keep the sights steady through the break. Trust your grip. The line lives in your stance more than in your eyes. How will you shoot and move, yes? Do you want to kill Brask by not being able to pull all your weight?" We stood side by side on the firing line, aiming at a rust-welded plate that had been nailed into the back wall of the gym. It had pockmarks like cratered steel, which made sense. It probably was cratered steel. I lifted the pistol. It hissed with the slight magnetic pull from the priming coil. The sights flickered, barely functioning. I fired. Brask nodded. I fired again. The coil hissed and a reset. "You flinch less now," he said. "Your meat remembers. Not bad for soft skin." I smiled, but my arms ached. The coil pistol wasn't heavy, but the stance, the constant repetition, the way Brask refused to let me rest until he saw 3 perfect groupings in a row, it added up. When he was satisfied, he said, "You will drill this again tomorrow, yes? You do not always get to aim in the field. Not if you want to keep breathing." "Got it," I said. "No," he said, rolling his shoulder, "you do not got it. But you will, yes." By dinner, I could barely lift my tray. My arms trembled with the dull soreness that said the real pain would come tomorrow. I sat with Brask and Marcy, who were already halfway through their food. Brask inhaled protein paste like it was steak. Marcy picked at something grainy with a fork. She had clearly not enjoyed today's menu. They were both smiling. "Good news, Monk," Marcy said through a mouthful. "You're getting added to our team once you're trained." I blinked. "Really? That's official?" She nodded. Upper management signed off. "Captain said something about you being the weirdest pick since Brask, so naturally we're keeping you." I exhaled. Relief, real and heavy. These two had become the closest thing I had to friends in this place. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. "That's good news," I said. "Really good news." Marcy smirked. "Well, don't die during training or the first mission, and you might even keep the job." Brask grunted. "He will not die, yes? I will kill him first." That earned a laugh from us all and a shove from Marcy, which he pretended not to notice. The rest of the meal passed in easy rhythm. Despite everything, blood in my eyes, shaking limbs, nights spent in fear, it felt good to have something that resembled a routine. Even if it was a mad one compared to something like my lacrosse routine. After eating, I made my way to the library. Ka-Uru was at his usual corner, hunched over something alchemical that involved far too much steam and a coil of copper tubing that hissed whenever he adjusted it. He muttered to himself in wet syllables, occasionally tapping his temple and blinking through lens rotations like he was changing thought channels. I approached carefully. "Hey Ka-Uru. I was hoping to ask for your help again. I was hoping to find some historical documents." He jumped a little, then croaked. The tube hissed again. His lenses clicked. "Ah. Everett, old boy. What was that?" I was wondering if... "Historical texts? Yes. We have those. Looking to cross-reference, are we?" I nodded. "Exactly. I was hoping to dig through older saint writings alongside the official record. Maybe there's something buried in the margins." He laughed, a bubbling sound. "Oh, of course, my boy. Though I must warn you, these shelves have been quite scoured. Quite scoured indeed. Still, a fresh eye may yet find something new." He stared at me, long enough to feel the quiet press in. Then he jolted like he remembered something. Yes. Here. Ballast. A good starter. Bit dry, but thorough." He shuffled through a crate and handed me a vellum-wrapped volume. The cover was stamped with gold ink and bore a seal I didn't recognize. "Do return it when you're done," he said, then paused. "Tell me, old boy, how is the attempt at ritual magic going?" I froze for half a second, then tried to sound frustrated. "Still haven't really gotten the hang of it. It's a lot of reading. But I think I'll get there." Ka-Uru made a sympathetic noise and waved a finger in the air. "Perseverance, my boy. That is the true reagent. Keep stirring and something will rise to the surface." His right lens whirled. I couldn't tell if it was a wink or a scan. "Thanks, Ka-Uru. I should get to it if I want to read anything before sleep." "Go on then," he said, turning back to his hissing works. "The past is waiting." I slipped away with the scroll. It was heavier than it looked. Back in my cell, I unraveled the seal and sat on the cot. The title read: Anointed History ab Urbe Candida, Contemplations on Known History by Ballast. I leaned back against the wall and started to read. The vellum scroll spread across my chest like a second blanket. My hands gripped the edges lightly, careful not to crease the aged material. The ink still held its black, crisp edge even where the fibers showed signs of wear. I had the blanket pulled halfway up my legs in the lamplight low. From the founding of our sinful city to this present watch, the teachers of youth have recited that we live in the fourth epoch, and that the first three stand behind us like coastlines eroded and submerged. Some scoff at the count, because the waves have taken the shore and left only broken pilings. I set out the case not as a purveyor of marvels but as a recorder of public things, for I have handled stones pried from the city's oldest footings, I have read data spared by flood and fire, and I have listened to the instruments that still hum beneath the streets. If the harvest of proof seems mixed, remember that the enemy prefers smoke to flame. The Archons, whose reign began with the reshaping, are past masters of the half-erased line. My fingers traced the margin. I kept reading. This was mostly a repeat of church doctrine so far. In the early days of their ascent they called themselves stewards. Their new principalities bore mild images, and their pacts spoke of continuity rather than conquest, or so it is said. Before their pacts and deals stood the dreamer, the living law of measure, who drew breath and kept time. The Archons learned from her, received gifts of rules and crafts beyond them, and mastered the ways of power. They were raised not as kings but as priests, as any house raises a faithful overseer when the master sleeps. Then came ambition, and with ambition the audacity to write anew everything she had wrought. In that act lies the sense of the reshaping. Not the building of new walls alone, but in the reordering of the hours, so that what once served mercy began to serve their appetite. They bound our city to their columnized engines fueled on her corpse and named that bondage prosperity. I blinked. It was dense. But it didn't feel academic. The tone held bitterness like iron on water. The reshaping was not a storm that passes in a day. It was a season of furious violences that the Archons framed as reforms and perfection. Shorelines withdrew from their own footprints. Roads forgot their destinations and woke facing unfamiliar gates. Maps lost their truths entirely. Stones that had anchored valleys and markets were lifted like rain on the mountaintops. Calendars shed their logic and took on seasons and elements that did not remember harvest or tide. Fields that had rested and fed for generations peeled away to meet the wind, and the water that once returned to the same cistern traveled elsewhere as if answering a new gravity. The Archons founded their houses and called them everlasting. They stationed their heralds at crossroads and taught the milestones to count in a different tongue. In every courtyard and on every stair they placed a keeper who bowed to a title and forgot the old. A steward who sits too long forgets he is not the owner. The Archons forgot, and the forgetting hardened into rule. There was no sarcasm in the record, and no appeal to pity. It speaks only to how the world was forced to accept a new normal overnight. I do not claim to restore the early epics as a painter restores a fresco. The plaster has fallen and the pigments are scattered. I do claim the following as observed fact recorded in my field notes. The Church is correct that a gentler order preceded the fourth, and material signs of it remain. The first sign appears in the measure of water. In the foundations of the pre-reshaping cisterns a fixed pattern recurs, 17 inlets balanced by 17 outflows, arranged in paired arcs around a central plenum. Livy documented this at sites C12, D7, and E3, with plan drawings, caliper measurements, and photographs taken at first light to reduce glare. Each inlet shows identical tool marks, shallow V-chisel scoring at 5 mm intervals, consistent with a single workshop tradition. Each outflow bears a stamped numeral in an archaic register that counts from 1 to 17 and then repeats. The counter-evidence lies in the stones across sites C12, D7, and E3. The same 17th cadence appears in forms that Parthosia does not otherwise build. Foundation rings are heptadecagonal rather than circular. Colonnades use drums cut with 17 flutes per course, a proportion unknown in local corporation manuals. Stairwells climb in flights of 17 with landings that repeat a fixed ratio of tread to rise. Lintels carry beadwork in runs of 16+1, separated by a larger boss that is never numbered. In the crypt at D7, 17 shallow niches encircle a central plinth. The niches are equal, and the plinth alone takes the load. Votive tablets recovered from the same layer list offerings in series of 17 beneath a single larger sigil that recurs at the apex of door frames and on capstones. None of these marks correspond to Archonic shop stamps or packed survey codes, and none match the modular standards used in Parthosian civic works. Taken together, the pattern reads as program rather than ornament. 17 repeats as a subordinate count set around a single axial seat. The plan geometry, the load paths, and the icon bands all privilege one center with 17 attending elements. Parthosia's current cult architecture favors monotheistic schemes, a strict 17-fold scheme, consistently anchored by a solitary primary, has no analog in present practice. The most economical reading is theological, a monopolar cult with a high god set over 17 secondaries, expressed in masonry, measure, and sequence. Tool marks, mortar analysis, and datable fills place these works prior to 4th epoch retrofits. The alignment is archaeological, not doctrinal, and it is repeatable wherever the old fabric remains. My scaled drawings, context photographs, and catalog of motif frequencies are available for inspection. I mouth the words as I read them, trying to imagine those cisterns. The second sign is found in the engine cores beneath the hive cities. The elder mechanics can service the housings and keep the feeders balanced, but they do not know how to expand the output or restart a cold heart. The cores sit at the centers of the grids like artifacts, not like machines made in this age. Their alloys do not match corporate foundry catalogs. Their fasteners do not follow Parthosian thread standards. Their conduit trees enter on 17 spines around a single axis, yet the surrounding galleries follow paired or tetradic schemes. Adapter plates, shims, and sleeve rings show where later builders forced the city to meet a device that had never been designed for it. Corporate data ledgers claim authorship, but 4th epoch records already list these cores as inherited infrastructure. Smuggled and stolen survey notes describe legacy engines present at the first corporate audits. Maintenance logs record the polishing of nameplates rather than the casting of new hearts. Corrosion layers on the original casings predate the earliest reshaping retrofits. Inscriptions on the inner baffles repeat a 17-fold register beneath a solitary master mark that does not appear in any Archonic script. Taken together, the fit is archaeological rather than contemporary. The engines do not belong to the order that governs them. They are prior. If the fourth found them in place, and the law of 17 binds their intake, then the most economical conclusion is that these cores are relics of the third epoch or earlier, retained because nothing built since can replace them. The third sign is physical, and for that reason the most disputed. Instrument logs from the early fourth epoch record a suite of inversions that should not coexist with prior baselines, nociceptors firing as reward, analgesics provoking distress at low doses, tensile tests in which materials grew more brittle under added heat, and chronometers that lost time when moved closer to their power sources. Clerks called these anomalies adaptations, but the ledgers they kept still compare them against older norms, which implies the norms existed. In the months that followed, civic order and remedies unraveled. Public order codes note crowds lingering in Hazard, children laughing at Burns, and watchmen abandoning posts when the 90s their fear too much to hold attention and they wandered into the dark never be seen again. Data implies. Petty theft rose as the cost of shame fell. Riot reports mention by name the first corners where pain drew a crowd instead of dispersing it. These records do not prove a golden age, they prove a prior calibration. If the world can invert the valence of touch, heat, pressure, and light, then there was a valence to invert, and a law to break. The fourth epoch cannot be the beginning if its first books are already arguing with a standard they did not write. I was silent for a long time before reading the final stretch. My throat was dry. Betrayers the lot they turn their knives upon the giver. 17 hands held her down, 17 knives torn her into dripping chunks, and 17 principalities bore away a living trophy to wire into their vaults. I have read the first orders that went forth after the division, terse petty directives to secure resources all too mortal in the end. The Archons could not have done this unless they had hardened themselves beforehand. When they say they acted for our good, remember that the first wall raised around the engine cores to keep what they wrought out. From this crime flowed the reign of the corporations and the solidification where the rules of reality stopped bending marks the common start of the fifth epoch amongst church scholars. Toward the end even a scroll blurred with damage. I rubbed my eyes and yawned. I let the parchment close. It curled gently on its own. I stared at the ceiling for a long while and said nothing. And as I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind was racing. I have been in this world nearly a week now. It was hard to tell without the sun. The lighting in the compound shifted by schedule, not by sky, and the old stone walls seemed to absorb time like sand, quiet and slow. I had felt like I was getting a handle on things. The training, the rituals, the language of this place. But of course, that was just the intro. I knew it now. That first stretch of fear and confusion was only the onboarding. Now came the real work. The part where I needed to figure out what was actually happening. Who was lying? What mattered? What Everett had known? What had been deliberately scrubbed? I kept still. I didn't want to wake the pain behind my eyes. I had pushed too far during the last ritual, and even though the bleeding had stopped, my vision still had that raw tightness that came after crying too hard. There was a pulsing behind my temple. Not enough to stop me from thinking. All right. Start simple. What did Everett know? I reached inward, not into a trance but into recall. His memories were still mine. I did not receive all of them clearly or as if I were watching a film, but enough surfaced when I called. Fragments rose with muscle memory and glossed over facts from a school system engineered to coddle and shape. It felt like piecing together a puzzle made of faded safety pamphlets. He knew the standard Terran year was 3125. That was the current count. But there was no context for what that meant. No real history. Nothing that gave him an anchor. No wars. No dates. Just a few names and civic slogans. Everything else had been slotted into what the pods called essential context. And even that was generous. Everett knew there were other cities. They were listed on the net. Places like Harmouth, Varnhold, and Dry Channel. But no one ever left the city. That much had been baked in. Travel was impossible without sponsorship, something about the distances involved. Intercity transfers were exceedingly rare and handled by the corporate elite directly, making them more of a myth than a fact. People didn't talk about them. The cities had the same shape, more or less. The same architecture. The same educational bundles. A different stadium name, maybe. A different mascot. But culturally, they didn't seem that different. That should have been a red flag. But Everett didn't know to question it. He had never been taught how. There were moons, continents, oceanic names that no one had ever seen. All listed in the navigation protocols and old maps. But they were blanks. The net never showed real photos. No genuine videos. Just high-generated renditions. The dark zones in Everett's mind were getting larger the more I applied what I had learned in basic critical thinking. It was like someone had started to build a world and then stopped halfway, leaving the outer edges as placeholders. It reminded me of Fog of War on an era of an MMO map that you had yet to explore. Only this made me sick, and the more I focused on it the more my logical training from Earth wanted to reject whatever it knew. The learning pod had given him Keel Authority Incorporated's basic civic bundle. That was it. That was his entire window into reality. According to that, the Authority had generously founded their city, laying down the infrastructure needed to support human survival on Parth Soya. The pod said it plainly. The Keel Authority had saved humanity. Except the name Keel didn't appear in the record the same way. And yet they admitted that the original Keel family wasn't part of the civic project at first. The names in the early investments were all minor shareholders who during the founding had seized power in a hostile takeover to save the people from themselves. Everett had never seen that action as a hostile one. He had only ever known the Keel Authority as omnipotent and benevolent. A faceless corporation that had provided food, shelter, and structure. Everything came from them. The walls. The water. The power. He never questioned it. He wasn't supposed to. 2 timelines. One of corporate beneficence. One of divine murder and theft. They didn't line up. Not cleanly. But maybe they weren't meant to. Maybe they were both lies. I clenched the blanket around my ribs. It didn't help. The tension stayed. Why couldn't I just get a clear answer? Why did everything have to be coded in riddles and half-truths and symbols scratched into old vellum with too much flourish and not enough explanation? Why did I have to train to exhaustion every day just to get 5 minutes of clarity? My shoulders ached. My eyes itched. I felt the weight of the last week settle into me like cold water. I pulled my blanket tighter to my body. I would keep thinking. Keep digging. But not tonight. Tonight, the world was warm and dark. And I let myself sleep. Waking the next day, I was angry. Not afraid. Not anxious. Not confused. Angry. Angry in a way that wasn't useful or clever or easy to direct. It was the kind that started as a tightness in the chest and slowly boiled out through the arms, coiling into fists I hadn't unclenched since I first opened my eyes. I lay on the cot staring at the ceiling. My skin itched. My brain buzzed. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to train. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to explain, because I couldn't. Because I wasn't sure what I even could say. There were no words for what it was like to read centuries of buried history, to feel the gap between one world and the next widen every time I turned a page. The way Everett's memories didn't fill in the blanks so much as underline them. There had been whole continents he couldn't name, moons he didn't know the names of, songs he knew only in the marketing version. It was not ignorance. It was a deliberate absence, a container shaped by someone else. And I was stuck in the shape. I didn't move when Brask pounded on the door. Up, Monk. Time for your blessed punishment. I rolled over. Faced the wall. Closed my eyes. I should have known better. There weren't any locks on these doors. I knew that. But in my half-sleeping haze, I had still hoped. Or at least pretended. It didn't matter. The door slammed open. Brask didn't say a word. My cot flipped. The whole thing. With me still in it. I went tumbling through the air like a sack of dirty laundry and slammed onto the floor shoulder first. My elbow cracked against the uneven flagstone. My head bounced. For a few seconds, everything turned into a spray of white stars. "Good morning." Brask barked, grinning down at me with those 2 sharp teeth. "I see your faith in the dreamer has made you light enough to fly. You should practice the landing, yes?" I groaned and curled upright. My ribs hurt. My cheek felt rug-burned. I didn't say anything. I just glared. He noticed. His nostrils flared slightly as he inhaled deeply. His grin deepened. "Oh," he said. "You're angry." I didn't answer. I was already pulling myself up. Brask sniffed dramatically. Rich with anger, ripe with sweat, yes. You're finally seasoning properly, Monk. Thought you might be one of those soft types that folds after the first week. Let's find out." We didn't go to the mats. He dragged me outside. Already grabbing the baton from the wall peg. The synthetic training rod still had the worn grip that dug into my palm. That was good. I needed something to dig in. The gym annex had a gravel pit that I hadn't seen used yet, rimmed with concrete and oil-stained benches. Brask kicked aside a faded training cone and gestured to the middle of the ring. It was the first time I had seen the red-gray sky and the ever-present misting that rained from the monotonous dreary dome above. No pads today. No countdown. You hit until you break. I'll stop you when I get bored. I snarled and came at him. It was too sloppy. He punished me with a sidestep and a slap across the back of the head. I stumbled, wheeled, swung again. Too wide. He danced backward, tail flicking. You swing like a soft skin who read about fighting in a calendar that drifted down pipe, Monk. I rushed him. Too much weight forward. He caught my baton on his and twisted. I nearly lost my grip. Better, he said. But you were really trying, yes? A wicked grin that was all fangs and teeth cracked across his face. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth was clenched too tight. I charged again. He let me get closer this time. Close enough I thought I had him. Then he headbutted me. Hard with enough force to snap my head back and send me stumbling, but I didn't fall. That's the spirit, yes. Finally, you come at me like you are ready for the dying, no? I came again. We traded blows. My baton struck his ribs once, maybe twice. He hit me a dozen times more. None of them are hard enough to do serious damage. All of them are hard enough to bruise deep and leave stinging welts. Brask said, circling. Little man holding in too much pressure. You ever pop before? I didn't answer. But I had. More than once. It hadn't been fair on Earth. Not when the one thing that helped me focus, really focus, was violence. I hadn't been a monster. I hadn't been a bully. But when things got bad at home, when my father started swinging, I'd stopped being scared faster than any of my siblings. I started fighting back. At 10 I could slow him. At 12 I could stop him. He left before I turned 13. I didn't miss him. But I missed the space he'd taken up. That hole where I could put all my anger. That thing I could beat with righteous fury. After that, it had been sports. Lacrosse mostly. Team drills. Controlled adrenaline. It gave me rules. Limits. Here, the limits were gone. And I let the anger boil over. I rushed him again. I kept my stance lower. Kept my guard tighter. We circled. Exchanged real strikes. I got clipped in the thigh. Slammed his hip. Took a hit to the collarbone that made my arm go briefly numb. Brask whistled. There you are. Monk has come out to play, yes? He spun and came in fast. The fight changed. He wasn't playing anymore and I could see vaguely what he planned to do. I parried and my arm quivered with the quake of the blow. I gave everything to him in that attack. I had to keep him on the back foot. My senses screamed in dire need to avoid the oncoming blow. So I drove the offense blow after blow until my legs cramped and my lungs felt like fire. Until I slipped on the gravel and took a blow to the chest that knocked me flat. I didn't get up. Not right away. The sunless sky overhead buzzed faintly. The ring of gravel stayed still. Brask leaned over me. Better, he said. Still sloppy. Still blind. But you were not dying for a second there, yes? I rolled to my side and spat. My mouth tasted like copper. He helped me up with one thick furred hand. We break for noon, he said. We do range drills next. I nodded. The pain was familiar. Not pleasant. But known. And somehow, that made it okay. Fear I could handle. But anger was a fire that needed to burn. And today, it had found wood. You'd be surprised how effective mag dumping downrange is for stress. Something about the rhythm of the recoil and the hollow bark of the pistol made it feel like I was dislodging something rotten from the back of my skull. Brask stood over me, barking rhythm and stance corrections, but even he quieted eventually. I wasn't sure if it was out of pity or satisfaction, and I didn't care. I just needed the noise, the heat, the motion. The violence in my arms was better than the pressure in my chest. The coiled pistol hissed on overheat. I let it dangle against my thigh and leaned forward, catching my breath. My hair was soaked with sweat. My robe stuck to my back. Brask gave a low whistle and clapped a heavy paw on my shoulder. I flinched, more from surprise than pain. That enough bloodletting for the fight in your head, little monk? He asked, voice almost gentle. For now, I said. My throat was dry. He nodded, then jerked his snout toward the door. Wash. You stink, yes? I took the advice and trudged to the communal showers, finally using the sponge everyone else had touched. I tried not to think about it. The water was cold, the sponge was cold too. My fingers tingled when I toweled off. My skin, rubbed raw, felt new again. Back in my spare robe, I made my way to the mess. The lights hummed overhead, their dull, Unblinking glow casting sterile halos across the metal table where Brask and Marcy were already halfway through their food. They were in the middle of a conversation that had the sharp tempo of a disagreement. "Like 2 weeks of training is supposed to be enough," Marcy said, rolling her eyes. Her tone was clipped, irritated. She looked up as I sat down. "No offense. None taken," I muttered, digging my spoon into the gruel. Brask didn't seem to share her frustration. He chewed through a slab of something protein-rich and gestured with his spoon. 2 weeks is all we can spare. Since becoming anointed, we are on a timer, no?" Marcy frowned but didn't argue. She stabbed at her food and grumbled, "Still. I enjoyed having a month off. It sucks we have to go back out into those wastelands. I mean, why does the church even bother? Why not just do what Brask's tribe does and steal from the corporations? They're banned from the city, and yet there are thousands of them. They don't." She shifted into a mocking lilt. "Have an industrial base, do they?" She huffed, but Brask took it like a badge of pride. His grin stretched wide, rows of teeth catching the light. I could already see the smug quip rising in his throat. Before he could speak, I cut in. "It has to do with their historical opinion, doesn't it?" The words left my mouth without permission. The connection had been sitting in the back of my mind ever since I finished Ballast's historical scroll. But now that I had said it aloud, the logic clicked in place. Both of them blinked at me like I had grown horns. Brask let out a sharp laugh. "I told you he was one of those reading types. No?" Marcy tilted her head. "I think it's just because there's a bunch of ruins and trash no corporations claim out there." I frowned. "Seriously? There's never a jackpot find from prehistory? Like Third Epoch ruins?" They sobered immediately. Brask's mouth closed. His tone dropped. "No. And if someone were to find something rare, the Puritans may deem your task complete, yes? They do not share secrets lightly. So we do not find things of such value." My stomach sank. I had been secretly hoping that, beneath all the sermons and suicide training, there might be something worth discovering. Something old. Something real. Marcy broke the silence with a soft jab. "Don't look so cross. It's best to fly under the radar here. They won't hesitate to end us to tie off loose ends. Remember what they told us at the beginning? Martyrdom was a guarantee. That killed the mood." I chewed the rest of my meal in silence, staring at the warped metal of my spoon. The facts were settling like sediment. We weren't safe. Not from the core. Not from the church. Not even from each other, maybe. When I finished, I nodded to them both and stood without speaking. Brask gave a casual wave. Marcy didn't look up. My cell was dark when I returned. I didn't light the sconce. I didn't reach for a book. The cot creaked under me as I laid down, every muscle still raw from training. I stared at the ceiling until it stopped moving. I let the weight settle. Let it press into me. There was no cavalry. No safe house. No neat win condition waiting on the map. This wasn't a story with a chosen hero. It was a life hunted from both directions. A tightrope walk on blades. One slip and the church would erase me. One question too loud and the core would brand me a threat. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to plan. Didn't want to uncover the next mystery or answer the call. I just wanted to rest. So I did. When I woke the next morning, something blinked. It wasn't light. It wasn't sound. It was more like the afterimage of a notification in the corner of my mind, like a phone ping flashing at the edge of vision. But I didn't have a phone. I didn't have any tech at all, not the kind I used to know. And yet, when I focused on the blink, not physically, but mentally, like tightening a muscle I hadn't realized was there, it paused. Held still. A small bar. 2%. When I acknowledged it, the blinking stopped. The bar stayed, tucked now in some intuitive space beside the timer I had long since stopped questioning. Something I could pull forward if I concentrated. Something internal, nested deep in the pact I had made with this world. I blinked again. Still there. It didn't feel intrusive. I am not sure whether it was the notification or the fact that Brask's insistent knocking had trained me to wake slightly before he arrived. So when it came that heavy, rhythmic pound that could only belong to an owl the size of a vending machine, I was already rolling to my feet. Groggy. My robes still damp from yesterday, but I was up. I called out, voice still sanded from sleep. "Yes, Jesus, I'll be right there." I opened the door. Brask stood in the hallway with one brow cocked and teeth showing in something halfway between a grin and confusion. "Who is this Jesus?" "I am Brask." "Clearly." "No?" I froze. My blood went cold. Stupid. Stupid. That was Earth talk. And not just a phrase, a name. A name loaded with more implications than I had time to unpack. I started, stalling just long enough to pivot. It's just a saying. You know, like. Surprise. Brask squinted at me, sniffed once, then shrugged. Your sayings are strange. But your smell is honest. So. Come. I followed, relieved he didn't push harder. My mind latched onto the distraction like a lifeline. By the way, Brask, what is this blinking bar in my notifications? It popped up this morning. It says 2%. That made him stop. He turned fully, eyes wide with interest. Ah. You have made progress in the understanding of your gnosis? This is good, yes. That bar must be full before you seek the next crown. If it is not, if you try to climb without clarity, the side effects worsen. Exponentially, even. Wait, I said, keeping pace as we resumed toward the gym. You mean I have to understand it? Like, really understand? Because I barely understand anything going on right now. Do you? Brask barked a laugh, deep and warm. No one understands in the beginning. This is normal. But yes. You must live the path. Embody it. Like Brask who fights with muscle and sinew. That is my way. That is how I progress. Slowly, yes. But true. His voice shifted subtly. The humor faded at the end. Worry? Or something close to it. I wanted to ask more, but by then we had reached the gym, and Brask was already back to his usual self. All grins and shouting. The routine had grown punishing. That morning he pushed harder than usual, driving me through a dozen drills and corrective exercises designed to tear the weakness from my form. It was never just brute repetition. He made me analyze every motion, how I stood, where I held tension, how the baton should angle through a strike to keep from jamming my own wrist. When I got it wrong, he hit me. Not out of cruelty, but out of instruction. He never struck in anger. It was always a quick pop across the arm, or a jab at the gut to demonstrate what my enemy would do if I failed to guard properly. He narrated the beatings like a coach. No. Look. Now Brask is inside your reach. You would be dead. Again. Your elbow. Keep it in. By midday my shoulders were a fire pit of lactic acid and regret. But I didn't complain. Not out loud. After a short break which I barely felt, he took me to the firing range. Brask handed me a coil pistol. I took it. He made me check it. Safety, grip, stance. The magazine loaded with powdered salt ferrite blend, each round jacketed in polymer marked with glyphwork. No bullets in the traditional sense. The weapon used condensed magnetic acceleration with coated arcanoflux to produce reliable kinetic feedback. It kicked like a horse and hissed like a pressure vent. We lined up at separate booths. Watch, Brask said, raising his weapon. His bulk shifted with a strange grace, like a bear trained to dance. He breathed once, centered, and then fired 3 times. Each shot rang out with a sharp, whip-like snap. Each hit the center of the far dummy. He turned to me, all tooth and challenge. Your turn. I took my stance. Not perfect. But better than last week. I drew breath, leveled the pistol, and fired. The kick snapped through my arm. My ears rang. The shot struck low. Fire. A near miss. The edge of the shoulder. Fire. Center mass. A win. It surprised me how quickly the anger bled away. Every trigger pull was like drawing venom. Every burst of light and sound pushed the frustration back into the corners of my chest, where it belonged. Brask watched me. Said nothing for a long time. Then he stepped forward, nodded once, and reset the dummy. Again. So I did. We stayed until my arms ached from the recoil and my fingers trembled. He never barked once. No shouting. No critique. Just that silent, solid presence beside me, matching my pace shot for shot. By the time we finished, I was sweating through my robes. By the time I had washed and changed, dinner was already in full swing. The humid air clung to the walls, thick with the smell of broth and cheap bread. My second pair of robes stuck slightly at the seams, still damp from being hastily wrung out earlier that morning. I moved toward the long hall, boots scuffing across uneven stone, until I spotted Marcy waving me over. She and Brask were seated at the middle table, near the far brazier where the light didn't flicker as much. A third figure sat with them, someone I hadn't seen before. As I approached, I noticed the stranger's robes were the same dull brown as the rest of us, but tailored better. He carried himself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Marcy gestured to me as I pulled up a bench. Everett, this is our section's cohort captain, Lenandris. Lenandris gave a nod. Hello, Monk, he said, voice dry and rasping, like his tongue was too tough. I nodded back, but it was hard to focus on what he said. My eyes caught on his hands first. Tiny blood blisters rose beneath the skin at each fingertip, subtle but unmistakable. His nails came to fine, deliberate points. When he tapped them against the iron rail beside his tray, they clicked with a sound just sharp enough to bother the ear. The next detail came when he moved his hands, the faint seams down the center of each palm, pale and slightly raised. New ridgelines curled in concentric arcs near his thumbs, catching on the inner cuff of his glove as he peeled it off. Bone knots swelled under the knuckles, lifting slightly as he flexed his fingers. The blue veins that traced his skin didn't fork the way they should, they ran clean and direct, right to the tip. Then he looked up and met my gaze, and everything in me quieted. His eyes caught the light like glass. A clear, second lid swept across them and retracted again before I could blink. The corneas looked too full, as though the lens behind them had thickened to a bulge. Faint halos clung to every reflection, even in the dimness of the dinner hall. He didn't seem to notice the brightness. His sleeves slipped up as he leaned forward. The tendons at his wrists stood taut, almost corded. Around each joint, tiny dimples had formed in tight rings, like miniature ports set into the flesh. The hair along his forearms had thinned and regrown into whisker-fine strands that lifted from the skin when he shifted, responding to the movement of air. When he inhaled, I heard it. A soft click deep in his chest, like a mechanism resetting, followed by a slow return to silence. He turned slightly to gesture toward Marcy, and I saw two hard ridges under his robes, right between the shoulder blades. Not symmetrical. Not cosmetic. I couldn't tell if they were bones or something added later. But the way he moved told me all I needed. He had adjusted to them. Lenendris moved with care, never brushing too close to the wall, never letting his arms swing casually. He looked at me a second longer than I liked. Then the clear lid swept his eyes again, and the moment passed. Brask and Marcy were already halfway through their meal. I tried to catch up, chewing slowly while conversation buzzed at the corners. Most of the talk was harmless, chatter about food quality, weather, the state of the showers. Lenendris didn't speak much unless prompted, but when he did, the others listened. His presence carried weight, the kind that came from scars you couldn't see. At one point, Marcy elbowed me gently. "You doing okay, Everett? You still looked a little pale when you came in." I nodded. "Just sore. Been a long few days." "They'll get longer," Brask added, smiling with too many teeth. "But maybe you finally grow some sinew, no?" Lenendris turned to me again. "Monk, you missed the first sermon. Gnosis after effects. Not your fault." I paused with my spoon halfway to my mouth. "But," he continued, slow and even, "you will attend the next. No exceptions." I nodded automatically. "Understood." He looked satisfied, though the expression barely registered on his altered face. We finished our meals in relative quiet. There was a calm that settled around the table, the kind of silence that arose when friends were comfortable with each other's exhaustion. For once, I did not have to force myself to eat. The food still tasted like paste, but it sat well and the familiarity helped. After a few more minutes, Lenendris stood without flourish. His movements were smooth and methodical. He nodded once to Brask, once to Marcy, and then fixed his eyes on me again. "Rest well, Monk. You'll need it." And then he left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "He's something," I said. Marcy gave a short laugh. "You have no idea. Just be glad he's on our side." The rest of dinner passed in low conversation, and when I finally returned to my cell, my thoughts spun slowly in Lenendris's wake. The changes to his body hadn't come from training. They weren't the result of age, injury, or surgery. No one just grew seam lines down their palms or gained second eyelids. Not without cost. Not without something deeper happening. He was further along. That was the phrase that stuck with me. Lenendris was further along in his crown path. And if that was what I had to look forward to, I wasn't sure if I should feel awe or dread. I lay back, hands behind my head, listening to the quiet hum of water pipes and distant ventilation. The meal settled in my gut. The taste of broth still clung faintly to my teeth. Chapter 5, The First Sermon. When I returned to my room that night, I re-entered my domain for the first time since the last divination. The ritual came easier now, the resistance between thought and form softening just enough to ease the passage. I shut my eyes and let the structure build itself around me. The hyper-style throne room took shape column by column, vast and gleaming in the roiling red mist that bled from the walls like vapor from a cracked pipe. It clung to the table, curled around the edges of my seat, but never quite touched me. Not blood, not smoke, but something close. A substance of memory and motive, I thought. The taste of copper without the weight. I stepped forward and sat at the throne. It didn't creak or shudder, it simply acknowledged me with a pulse of warmth. My hand brushed the edge of the table, and a new circuit bloomed from its surface. Obsidian shot with gold, etched in glimmering pathways like the diagram of a nervous system. The lines converged in the center, forming a shallow basin. From it, a pendulum rose. Tonight's question was simple. I had prepared nothing ornate. No triple circle incantations or divining spheres. I just needed a yes or no. Should I trust the words of the sermon? The pendulum began to sway. Slow, deliberate arcs. The chain made no sound. There was no wind to stir it, no breath or hand to guide it. Just the weight and the answer. It turned. Aligned. Yes. I stared at it until the circuit dimmed and the pendulum vanished back into the table. The red mist receded a little. I released the domain without effort. There was no drama and no echoing collapse. The throne faded, and the world narrowed to the cold firmness of my cot. I fell asleep quickly. I woke to rapid knocking. Not the usual rhythmic pattern of Brask's annoyed patience, this was faster, more agitated. I peeled myself off the cot and opened the door in time to see both Brask and Marcy standing there, robes disheveled and faces flat with irritation. "Come on, Monk," Marcy muttered. "We gotta get there. The church hates when we're late for our punishment." She looked tired. Not sleepy, but tired in the way kids looked when being dragged to school assemblies. Brask grunted and rolled his shoulder like he was trying to knock off a cramp. "You dress slow. You always dress slow," he said. I didn't bother answering. My robes were already half-tied, still damp from yesterday's sweat. I followed them in silence down the main corridor. We filtered into the sanctuary quietly. No pews. Just a vaulted space lit by hundreds of flickering candles that climbed the wall sconces like vines of fire. The air smelled of hot wax and old leather. People trickled in alongside us, all robed the same. Same dye-lot brown, same hem length, same hooded folds. I only noticed it now, but Brask seemed to be the only non-human. But under the folds and hoods, the human similarities ended. The room held maybe 60 of us. And now that I'd been paying attention, I noticed how many bore marks of crown progression. Shoulders too broad. Joints that were too fluid. Lenses behind their eyes or replacing them entirely. Flesh that no longer fit the old definitions of human. Marcy leaned in toward me and whispered, "Oh great. It's Lucidius. He's a strict Puritan, so his lectures always feel forced." Brask gave me a sideways glance, almost like a warning. Then he turned to face the front. The preacher stepped up to the altar. No one announced him. No one lit anything new. He just stood there, robed in deeper black than the rest of us, and began to speak. His voice needed no amplification. "Children of your chains. Bound ones. Penitents. Hear me. You have taken the cursed path of Gnosis and it has taken you in return. Your skin no longer answers like a human skin. Your eyes hold lights that are not ours. Your names are written sin that cannot be unstained. By the common law of mercy that guards the gate, you may not enter the dreamer's garden as you are. What is twisted by betrayal will not pass into the place of rest. We dare to betray her trust as you are here against her will. The dreamer said it when the world was right. Then 17 hands broke the body that breathed that law. 17 houses bore away 17 living pieces and called it wisdom. Since that day the sky has been low and the grounds have been warped beyond understanding. Since that day those who anoint themselves in her betrayal change and are made to keep changing in spite of her great work. You know this in your bones. You look in a mirror and see edges that were not there when you were a child. You reach for a human hand and see your own as a monster. I call you what you are. Damn tools. There is one way left for you. It is narrow. It cuts the feet. You will walk it anyway. Bring back what was stolen. Seek the fragments of the dismembered Pantocrator and carry them home. You will not be paid in redemption, for it is not for you, not yet. You will not be praised in the annals of the church, you will be a torch that burns down to the hand that holds it. You will be what you are already, fuel for change. Do not fear the word. Fuel feeds a greater fire. If the dreamer rises, it will be on offerings of sinners such as yourself. If the seventh epoch dawns, it will break on the backs of those who bent themselves to this work until nothing was left to bend. If the body is made whole, if the count is made true, the Pantocrator may look on those who spent themselves for her and lift them from the pit. Not by our decree. By hers. Until that day, live as the damned live when they refuse to be useless. Obey the leash you begged for. You'll be tempted. The Archons will offer a cure for the last mooring holding your soul bound to the dreamer. They may even offer a quiet death dressed as mercy. But they will never offer you a place at their tables. Tools are not fit to dine with their masters. Hear me. They are the ones who broke the body and wrote a calendar that never ends. Their comfort is a lodge. Their absolution is a trap. Turn your face from these monsters. He looked around with a snide expression on his face. Some of you stand at the threshold of change and think you can turn back. You cannot. The sin you took has made its home. The mark has learned your blood and it could not cost you more. You ask me about paradise and I answer you straight. As we are, paradise will never receive you. Your breath is wrong for its air. But the garden remembers the hands that planted it. If those hands are gathered and made whole and raised, then mercy may flow from the well that was cut. You may be called from the place where the dark keeps what it thinks is its own. You may hear your name spoken by the voice that made names in the first place. Do not twist my words. I do not say will. I say may. Between those two words stands all the work of your miserable life. So rise, bound ones. Take the weight you owe. Choose it again every morning. Let the thin light of your lamp insult the dreamer's grace. When you fall, crawl toward the next true step. When you cannot crawl, call, and we will come and carry you, and if we cannot carry you we will take the piece from your hands and finish the walk for you. That is our part. 17 were stolen. 17 will be returned. If the dreamer rises, let her rise on your bones, and let her look down and say, this one burned clean. This one was fuel fit for a holy fire. Then let the gate that is shut to you now open like a mouth that has remembered how to smile. Amen. It took forever for him to lecture us on something we all must have already memorized. As Lucidia spoke, I let my eyes drift without ever settling too long in one spot, careful not to look openly bored. Everyone had their way of dealing with it. Some stood rigid, barely breathing. Others swayed or murmured along. My little group stuck together, separate from the masochists who bent forward on bare knees, whispering prayers or drawing shallow cuts with practiced fingers. That performance seemed to drain real pleasure from Lucidia's. I was more than okay letting him have their attention. As the final syllables of his sermon echoed off the high vaults, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The air was stale, heavy with candle smoke and sweat. My head throbbed slightly, either from the sermon or the sheer pressure of so many altered bodies crowding into one space. A familiar scent hit me as we began to shuffle out. Smoke, but not the cheap kind from camp heaters or burnt rations. Clove, but warmer. Mixed with something else I couldn't name. It stung the edge of my sinuses and made the back of my ears prickle. Monk. The voice came from just behind my shoulder, dry as sandpaper and steady. I turned and found myself face to face with Lenandris, cohort captain, second eyelids and all. He was smoking a vapor stick, thin and bone-colored, its tip pulsing with a steady amber glow. He exhaled a dense stream of spiced vapor, and my vision swam for a moment. Brask has been bragging about your progress, he said. For a pod person, that is. It is not an insult. We both were. I nodded once, unsure whether I was supposed to thank him or correct him. Most of us spend years building willpower. Years before we can conjure real emotion into our lives. Brask said you showed something different. He said you got angry. He took another long drag. His eyes didn't leave mine. The lid swept and returned again, a mechanical blink with nothing behind it but assessment. I hate to do this, he said, but our section's been underperforming. The church is breathing down my superior's neck. They think we're being treated too lightly. Another exhale. The smoke curled into strange shapes before vanishing. So with Brask's voucher, I'm ending your training early. Tomorrow, Brask will bring you and Marcy to me for assignment. That dropped like a stone. I hadn't even had time to process the last shift in reality, and now the horizon moved again. I know it's rushed, he added. If it were up to me, I'd let you adjust. But it isn't up to me. Be ready. He took one last pull, then tapped the vapor stick against his wrist. The glow winked out. As he moved past me, his shoulder didn't brush mine. He knew his dimensions too well. You'll do great, Monk, he called over his shoulder. We all learn on the job. Okay, I managed. It wasn't much of a response. But it was all I had. The air still carried the phantom burn of his vapor stick when Brask clapped me on the back hard enough to stagger me. Come, Monk. To the gym. Yes. I will miss forcing you to join me. My ribs ached just from the thought. But the sermon had taken up nearly half the day, so at least I wouldn't be put through the full gauntlet. Brask still made it count. He kept me moving until my shoulders buzzed and my legs locked up in false steps. I made it through on habit more than strength. My mind wasn't in it. Not really. I kept hearing Lenandris's voice under the beat of Brask's commands. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, I'll leave training behind. It was less of a promotion and more of a sentencing. Dinner that night carried attention just beneath the surface. The mess hall buzzed with conversation, but our corner of the table felt quieter than usual. Brask and Marcy flanked me like they always did, but the usual ease between them felt thin. I chewed slowly, weighing how to ask the thing that had been gnawing at the back of my mind since Lenandris dropped the bomb. "So," I said, keeping my tone light, "how do we even get out of the city? Isn't that, like, highly illegal?" The looks they gave me were matched in their exasperation. Marcy pinched the bridge of her nose. Brask just stared at me like I'd asked how to breathe. "Everything here is illegal, no?" Brask said, blunt as a hammer. Marcy rescued me a little with a wry grin. "It's just more tunnels and hidden passages. Everything the church does runs under the surface. But once we're out there for real, the first time is going to blow your mind." Brask let out a deep laugh, his teeth catching in the overhead light. "Yes, Monk. Do not gawk for too long. We must be fast out there." "No?" I frowned. "I still don't understand why we're on the clock. What's out there that makes time matter so much?" That dulled the moment. The lightness left their faces in stages. Brask's ears angled downward, and Marcy suddenly became very interested in stirring whatever passed for stew that evening. Marcy was the one who broke the silence. "Everything is out there, Everett. It's so hard to explain. There are Gog tribes and swarmer nests, those are nomadic. There are rogue AIs from who knows where or when. But mostly it's the wildlife. Highly niche," Brask said quietly. "Highly specialized. Each encounter is an apex, yes?" Marcy nodded. "Parthosia doesn't give second chances. The evolutional arms race skipped breaks and went straight off a cliff. You won't find anything out there that isn't perfectly tuned to its little patch of hell." I leaned back chewing my food and considered it. They were go-with-the-flow types, I realized. They fought, ran, and survived, but they did not catalog or analyze the way I did. "Can you give me an example?" I asked. "Of the last apex creature you encountered?" The tone at the table shifted. What little conversation had been crawling along slowed further. Marcy blinked a few times and looked past me like she was trying to focus on something far behind the wall. "Yeah," she said, her voice thin. "It was when we lost Hannah. Our lantern. The member you're replacing." Brask lowered his eyes. His jaw tightened. "We were in this cavern," Marcy continued. "Big. Too big. High roof, dark as pitch. Hannah had gone a little ahead with the light, just enough for us to keep pace. Then she trailed off." Brask picked it up. "Then something from above. It was fungus, we think. Predatory. Hung like moss. Waited for movement and then dropped. It was a digestive slime, yes. Very painful." He scratched absently at his forearm, eyes unfocused. "And whatever was left was slurped into the dark before we could do anything at all." Marcy forced a smile, but it didn't fit her face. "But hey, that's not the norm. Mostly we just run and hide so we can survive." Brask nodded. "You will see tomorrow, Monk. Do not worry. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear, but it was what I was going to get." There was a pause. No one said anything else. The food lost all flavor. We each finished at our own pace and let the silence carry us through the end of the meal. I excused myself early and headed back to my room. I had no appetite for small talk after that. Inside the cell, the thin count sat waiting, the book I'd been reading still turned down where I left it. I didn't pick it up. I stood in the center of the room, eyes fixed on the blank stone wall. I had a plan to prepare. The church had chosen its tools. They meant for me to be one of them. If I was going to survive what came next, I needed to get ahead of it. I needed every edge I could claim. Every answer they weren't giving. Every truth buried beneath their sermons and smoke. I returned to my chamber with too much on my mind and too little time to waste. This was it. My first assignment. The first taste of real physical freedom since I'd arrived. A part of me still couldn't believe it was happening. Another part, quieter but sharper, was already planning every possible angle. I wasn't going to walk out there unprepared. Not when the world outside the hive walls was everything they described, and worse. The room the church had assigned me still smelled faintly of iron and old water. It wasn't unpleasant, just sterile. Function over comfort. But when I finished the ritual and closed my eyes and reached inward, my domain was waiting for me. A heartbeat later the world folded inward like a seam, and I was standing inside it. The palace rose around me the way it always did, slow, deliberate, magnificent. Columns etched with circuit thread veins climbed into shadow. The walls glimmered faintly, breathing with that strange red fog that was neither smoke nor mist. My throne room looked like a fever dream of buried civilizations. Hyper-style arches like something out of ancient Egyptian ruins mixed with Baroque symmetry, everything accented by black metal and gold-veined obsidian. It should have been alien. It should have been frightening. Instead, it was more comforting than the cot in my cell had ever been. Here, I could feel my thoughts stretching. It wasn't just metaphor. The static weight of my body back on Parthosia lifted away, leaving my mind clear and sharp. Focus settled over me like a cloak, and all the noise of the day, the sermon, the dinner, Lenandris's words, slid into place behind me. I took a long breath and forced my attention to the task at hand. This wasn't about daydreaming. This was preparation. Tomorrow we would leave the city, and the way Marcy had spoken about what waited beyond the walls had carved its way into my thoughts like a hook. I couldn't afford blind hope. I needed answers. I approached the long obsidian table that stretched through the heart of the hall. Its surface pulsed faintly as I pressed my palms to it, like a muscle tightening in response to touch. Inlaid gold patterns shifted, responding to my intent before I'd spoken a word. The pedestal rose smoothly at the center, and a delicate pendulum of the same gold-veined material unfolded from the table's inner seam. The pendulum divination was simple. At least, simpler than the Digitarot had been. It required less energy, less strain, and less willingness to bleed. I still remembered the raw ache behind my eyes after the last time I'd pushed too far. I wasn't eager to repeat it. I set the ritual foundation in silence, letting the steps run through muscle memory. Center. Align. Anchor. I traced the circle and pressed the carved sigil at its edge, watching the fog in the room pulse in time with my breathing. The pendulum steadied itself above the center of the etched circle, motionless. The first question came naturally. Will tomorrow be safe? The pendulum gave a clean, decisive swing to the left. No. I exhaled through my teeth. Not surprising. Nothing here ever was. I stared at the swinging line of golden obsidian and considered the wording. That kind of question was probably too vague. Safety could mean anything, for me, for my team, for the mission. And the world outside wasn't known for being kind. I tried again. Will I be safe tomorrow? The pendulum stilled, then tipped forward and swung again. No. My heart thudded a little heavier in my chest. It wasn't a surprise, but the clarity of it scraped something raw. I felt the fog shift slightly overhead. No backlash yet. No tearing pain behind my eyes. The shield of the domain held steady. That was good. It meant I still had room to push. I pressed my hands against the table again, grounding myself in the cool surface. My heartbeat echoed faintly through the room, not in sound but as a pulse in the fog. I thought about what I wanted to ask next and how to phrase it. This time, the question wasn't about the world. It was about me. Can I rely on you to lead me tomorrow? I didn't fully know who the you in that sentence was. My power. My domain. The strange gnosis at the core of my crown. Maybe all of it at once. But I needed to know if what I was building inside myself would be enough. The moment the words left my mouth, the pendulum jerked as if something had plucked it. The fog darkened from a red haze to a deeper, almost clouded crimson. A pulse slammed through my skull like the tolling of a heavy bell. My knees buckled. The world of the domain wavered and folded back on itself. The ceiling stretched out and twisted before it all ripped away. I opened my eyes to the dull light of my chamber. My hands were pressed against the floor, and my head was pounding. Warmth trickled from my nose. When I wiped it with my sleeve, the fabric came away stained dark red. The room felt too small, too shallow after the vast weight of my domain. My breath rasped in my ears. It was a lesson. One I'd expected, but that didn't make it pleasant. This power had limits, and so did I. Pushing past them wasn't something I could do casually. Not yet. I leaned against the edge of the cot and wiped my nose again. It smeared across my wrist. My heartbeat finally began to slow. In the quiet, the ghost of the pendulum's final swing replayed itself in my mind, hanging there like an unspoken warning. Tomorrow would not be safe. The world had made that clear. I pressed the back of my head against the wall and let the chill bleed into my skin. The church wanted me to march out there like everyone else. But I wasn't going to step into whatever waited beyond the walls blind. If I was going to survive, I had to be sharper than the people around me. Faster. Quieter. And if my crown's gnosis had teeth, I needed to learn how to use them before something else decided to bite first. Blood still damp under my nose, I tilted my head back and closed my eyes. The rhythm of the pendulum still lingered behind them, a steady pulse in the dark. When I woke from a dreamless sleep, it was to the knocking I had grown accustomed to. A rhythmic, punctual rapping that had become the signature of my mornings. Brask, of course. I sat up slowly, mine still wrapped in the weight of fog dressed. "Come, Monk. Bring what you need for a few days. I brought you a bag. Open up, no?" His voice carried through the door like it always did, full of energy I hadn't yet mustered. I pulled on my sleeves as I shuffled barefoot to the door. When I cracked it open, he shoved a battered hiking pack into my chest hard enough to make me stumble back a step. The bag was leathery, worn smooth in places, with stitched patches where tears had once opened. It smelled faintly of dust and tanned oil. "Pack extra robes, yes?" Brask didn't linger. His gaze slid over me, then down to the pile of books near my cot. "Do not bring any of those, Monk. You will not love to carry them for so long." Then he trotted off without waiting for acknowledgement. I heard his voice bounce down the corridor as he called out that he was going to get Marcy. I stood there for a beat, still clutching the pack, then closed the door with my heel and started sorting. The bag was lighter than it looked. I packed the spare set of robes already stained at the cuffs from training and tucked in a trimmed bundle of ritual resources, cloths, chalk, a single thread of conduit copper. The essentials for a quick divination. Brask was probably right about the books. I left them in a neat stack, spines out. I ran my fingers over the top one before pulling the flap of the pack shut. When I made my way to the cafeteria, I spotted them immediately. Brask and Marcy were crouched beside one of the steel tables, packs open and rations spread out in orderly bundles. The rations were wrapped tightly in waxed cloth and sealed with red fiber bands. Brask waved me over without looking up. "Turn around, Monk. I fill your pack too." "Yes?" I did. He stuffed the top of my bag with 3 of the parcels, pressing them deep into the corners with a practiced motion. They were heavier than I expected. My shoulders tightened as I felt the shift in weight. Brask chuckled. "Now you are ready to collapse properly. We go see the captain before we go, yes?" We moved through the deeper halls quickly. Marcy walked beside me, quiet but not tense. Her gait was steady. The way she adjusted her pack spoke of experience. She didn't look at me, but she did lean just enough to nudge my arm as we rounded a corner. The room we entered was cleaner than most. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clearly built for something more than rest. Lenendris waited behind a broad table. His robes were folded with military precision, and the walls behind him were lined with thin shelving and pinned diagrams. A map was stretched across the surface of the table. "Ah, Team 3, he said as we entered. "You're taking Quadrant 3v1.56. Cross levels only for the new guy." He pointed at the map. The segment he indicated showed a wide arc near the city's outer edge. The lines were marked with faded ink, but certain notations stood out. Symbols, numbers, clipped phrases in shorthand I couldn't immediately read. There were black dots scattered through the zone. I tried to memorize the placement. "Stay on the crust levels," Lenendris repeated. "No dropping below 6. No breaches above 3 reported in the last month. You are clear to leave through Gate 7 and return through Gates 1 through 8. He paused only long enough to look each of us in the eye. "You are expected to be back in Horos Yard in a week's time. I don't need to remind you what happens if you are not." His tone left little room for interpretation. "Any questions?" Brask shook his shaggy head. Marcy shrugged once, casual. I thought about asking something about the map, the designations, the logical signals, but I didn't want to mark myself out. "Not here. Not yet." I gave a tight shake of my head. "Good," he said. "Dismissed." We turned to go, and Brask took the lead without hesitation. He moved with purpose, confident in the paths that twisted beyond the captain's door. I followed, and as we walked deeper into the tunnels and exited Horos Yard, it felt like we had descended for hours, though it was impossible to measure. There were no windows or gradients to track, no changing light. Just the slow pull of gravity and the echo of our steps. Brask and Marcy both seemed to relax the farther we got from the yard. Their postures slouched slightly, not in laziness but in relief. It was like watching 2 beasts of burden shed the weight of unseen yokes. Shoulders no longer squared for inspection. Eyes no longer scanning corners. But the calm didn't last. As we drew closer to Gate 7, something changed. Their movements grew sharper, more deliberate. Marcy adjusted the strap across her chest twice. Brask flexed his hands, cracked his knuckles one by one without speaking. I felt it in my throat, in the slow curl of dread that rose from somewhere behind the ribs. The gate loomed ahead like a sunken vault door half-wedged into the stone. It was massive, a fortress in miniature, sealed by rings of etched steel and sigil-etched clamps. There were gears the size of oxen heads, and along the upper rim, a rail of mesh that shimmered faintly with residual charge. Someone had laid a protection circuit into the structure, and not a small one. Standing before it were 5 men in white robes, their faces hidden beneath smooth masks marked with a black bar down the center. The sight of them stopped me cold. They looked too much like something from Earth. Something I had been raised to fear. The kind of white pointed hood that didn't belong anywhere, let alone at the edge of a holy site. I flinched without meaning to, and Marcy caught it. "They creep everyone out," she whispered. "Don't let them bait you." One of the masked men stepped forward. His hands were bare, long fingers curled over a polished staff that hummed faintly when he moved. He didn't speak to us directly. Instead, he looked at Brask with a tilt of the head, then turned that same slow gaze on Marcy, then finally me. I felt him trying to see under my skin. Brask stepped forward, shoulders wide. "Team 3, clearance code 71 Delta. Outbound, Quadrant 3V1.56. The guard didn't respond. He just glared from behind his mask. Another one turned toward the side of the wall and inserted a key the size of a forearm into a lock I hadn't noticed. A groan of machinery rolled through the tunnel. The gate shuddered. The lead guard finally spoke. "The Godmother takes no pleasure in what you are," he said, voice filtered through something synthetic. "Pray you return differently." Marcy didn't flinch. Brask smiled without teeth. I stayed still, jaw locked. The locks hissed open one by one. Pressure equalized with a rush of stale air, and the vault began to slide aside, slow and monumental. Beyond it, more tunnel. I blinked. Marcy snorted. "The exit's further in," she said. "Hidden, remember?" Brask raised both hands as if unveiling a grand truth. "Yes, Monk. It is still," and here he put on a haughty, mocking voice, "highly illegal, no?" His laughter echoed far too loudly in the stillness. I looked back once, but the gate was already grinding closed behind us. The robed figures stared until the last crack of light disappeared. The air past the threshold was different. Less filtered. Dustier. The scent of rust and old minerals hung thick. The lights were older here, strips of long-dead phosphor lining the edges of the walls, only a few still flickering weakly. A maintenance zone turned no man's land. We kept walking. The mood lightened slightly. There was a false calm that followed fear, and I recognized it for what it was, a defense. Brask and Marcy joked softly between themselves. I didn't speak too nervously, I listened. The path beneath our boots changed gradually from paved stone to half-exposed rebar and crushed tile. After some time, the passage bent downward. Not a slope. A shift in gravity. The sense of direction changed, and I realized we were moving toward something very old. The walls became uneven, the tunnel widening like a gullet. I reached out and brushed my hand against the stone. It was warm. Brask noticed. "The veins run close here, electrical, yes? Not dangerous, but good for cooking sometimes." Marcy rolled her eyes. "We are not roasting meat in the field again. That smell drew half a quadrant last time." Brask looked innocent. "But it was delicious." We walked on. My pack itched at my shoulders. The deeper we went, the more my pulse beat in time with something distant. A rhythm. Not a noise, exactly, but a tension. It lived in the stone. Brask turned sharply left and tapped twice against a wall that looked like any other. I almost asked what he was doing, but then the wall split. A hidden seam dilated open, revealing a narrow channel just wide enough for one person at a time. "Here is the exit," he said. Marcy ducked through without hesitation. Brask waved me forward. "Monk, after you." The stone was slick at the edges. I pulled my pack tight and stepped through. The tunnel beyond was darker still, but the scent changed first. My brain tried to make sense of it. Wet metal. Algae. Ozone. Then we rounded a curve and light flared ahead. Light. A crack in the ceiling far above let in a shaft of pale light. The floor ahead sloped down into a basin of broken concrete and shattered road. Vegetation clung to the cracks, mosses and frond-like stalks that swayed with vibration of our steps. The surface? Marcy turned and grinned at my stunned face. "Told you it would blow your mind." At first, I thought I had gone colorblind. The red-gray hue that stained every corridor, every cell, every memory I had of the city was gone. In its place, contrast. Pale, stinging, merciless contrast. Black and white in raw saturation, like light had given up on nuance. We stood on the edge of the high overlook of a cliff, but not of earth or stone. This was a ledge formed from what looked like half-melted polycrete and fractured metal scaffolding, grown over with thick nettings of black moss and braided wire or roots. From here, the world before me stretched in every direction and none at all. There was no sky. That absence struck me more than anything. No dome of air above. Just height. Towering, incoherent height. Buildings of impossible scale reached up into a haze of light that came from no clear source. Through gaps in the colossal structures, holes that must have been miles across, massive shafts of light poured downward like blades. God rays, though no god would ever design this. The land below wasn't land in any natural sense. It was layers of platform and cliff, cavern and ruin. Technological and organic, intertwined but not integrated. Vines the thickness of train lines slithered through shattered manufactories. Staircases rose from nothing and led into blank vertical slabs. Whole towers were tipped at strange angles, braced against mountains made of rusted girders. It was not one world. There were 1,000 built on top of each other and none of them had one. It was like the architects had warred with each other, in a mad scrabble, each claiming a little more of the space before being swallowed up by another faction's dream. And in the cracks where vision failed, nature took root. Not as savior, but as another predator in the food chain of forms. Fungus fields the size of cities clung to the undersides of broken platforms. Gnarled tree columns, bark riddled with circuitry, sprouted from sewage drains and reached toward the false stars above. Nothing was clean. Everything was in motion or in ruin. In the far distance, I could see something shift. Not a creature. A part of the landscape. A wall folding. A tower retracting into itself. I blinked and it was gone. Marcy stepped beside me, her voice low. It gets worse the longer you look. Brask was crouched at the edge, scanning with a cracked monocular. We are on a good cliff. Visibility. No nests. Wind favors us, yes? What wind? I asked. I looked up. The city was not just built on the land, it was built into it, like the bones of an ancient, immortal thing. Terraces climbed in measured steps, one above another, until the highest tiers vanished into a blinding haze. Walls rose out of older walls. The whole mass scaled upward in a vast pyramid, so tall that any building on Earth would have felt like a toy beside it. The scale of it made the ground tilt under my feet. Every level carried its own world, ledges, cables drawn tight as harp strings, windows stacked like counting stones. Far above, cranes drifted in slow arcs, small as insects at that distance. The air tasted faintly of metal and rain. Heat breathed from vents cut into the masonry, and the sound of it all came down as a steady, patient roar. I tried to take it in at once and failed. The city dwarfed the landscape that had already dwarfed me. The nearer tiers pulled at my eye while the upper levels erased themselves behind wires and the crust of roofs above. I had to set my hand on the rail and steady my breathing. It was all too much. The scale. The light. The way the cliff beneath my feet felt like the edge of something final. Not just a drop, not just a descent, but an uncoupling from everything that had ever made sense. It didn't feel like I had stepped out of the city. It felt like I had been ejected from it. Ejected from Earth. Ejected from reason. There was no sky, you couldn't see it even staring into the god rays, it was just blinding. I kept trying to remember that. My eyes searched for something to ground me, some patch of blue, some clouds, even smoke or stars. Anything. But there was only height. Unending tiers of shattered architecture, twisting scaffolds, inverted towers, ruins of things no sane builder would ever claim. Whole facades crumbled inward like fossilized flowers. Gutters the width of rivers poured light instead of water. It was an impossible place built on impossible logic, layers of megastructure folding over one another until the idea of direction lost all meaning. There was no horizon. Just platforms and sinkholes, crawling infrastructure, vegetation that looked angry to be growing, and towers that swayed in a wind I couldn't feel and wasn't sure if it was caused by a wind at all. It was like someone had left every machine in the world running and walked away. Or no. Not one machine. All of them. All the factories, printers, bio-weavers, scaffolding arms, civic utilities, architectural AIs. Nightmares all let loose to print and build and consume until they ran out of code and turned on each other. Like a war of creation itself. There was no sense of design left. Just artifacts of purpose fighting for a foothold. I felt sick. Not from motion or smell. From scale and the sheer alienness of it. What? What are we supposed to do out here? The words escaped me like air from a puncture. I didn't expect an answer. Marcy and Brask both turned, not with confusion, but interest. They had seen this before. They had watched someone new see it for the first time. There was no joy in their faces. Just the quiet expectancy of veterans watching a child walk into a deep pool. "We are out here to collect goods for the church, no?" Brask said, casual as if he'd announced lunch. His hand reached behind his robes and produced a coil pistol, the same kind we'd trained with in the firing range. He tossed it to me. I caught it clumsily. It was warm. Just like training, yes? Marcy folded her arms and nodded, then turned to Brask with a more serious look. "It's not too hard. Brask, what's Quadrant 3v1 estimated to have?" Brask sniffed the air. A deep inhale. He held it, then let it out through his nose with a low rumble. "Foodstuffs. Hunt type. Routine, I think. Captain is being gentle with new monk, yes?" He hiked his robe up around the waist and started adjusting the layers. Only now did I understand their full purpose. The red-gray light of the city had masked the true brightness outside. Out here, everything was washed in searing infrared. There was no filter. Only harsh contrast and merciless exposure. Inside, the city used some kind of red channel suppression, for safety of the eyes and skin. Out here, the filter was absent. Only the thick cloth robes would save us. Brask pulled a rope from a hidden loop in his pack and tied it to a broken pylon wedged into the overlook. With one sharp toss, he sent it over the ledge. The cord hissed as it unraveled, snaking its way down to what I thought was ground. But it wasn't. It was a tangle of interlaced walkways grown or printed together like a mockery of a transit nexus. No two lines were level. Nothing looked stable. Brask leaned over the edge, gave the rope a test tug, then dropped to a crouch and started his descent. He went quickly, like a man who had done this many times and already knew the weak points to avoid. In moments he was a dark blur below, then a distant voice echoing up. "Send down the cub, yes? I will catch him when he falls." Marcy gave me a look that was all sympathy and no argument. I didn't even try to protest. That was just how Brask was. I holstered the pistol, tightened the strap across my chest, and walked to the edge. The cliff was pocked with metal ridges and slumped barriers, none of which looked designed to hold weight. I didn't look down. I just took the rope, wrapped it twice around my right forearm, and began my descent. The first drop was not far, but the sensation of falling toward that landscape was unlike anything I had ever known. The buildings were not buildings, they were ecosystems, territories, and warnings, half digested by a world that no longer recognized the difference between alive and operational. When I reached the midpoint of the rope, the walkway beneath me flexed. I adjusted my grip, slowed my descent. There was no wind, but the light bent oddly as I moved. Everything here felt off. Brask met me at the bottom and steadied my landing with one massive hand. His other was already on his weapon. "First climb. You did not scream. This is good." Marcy landed behind me with practiced grace. She took point without speaking, stepping lightly along the twisting walkway. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the levels above and below. I took a moment to orient myself. The cliff we descended stood behind us like a wound in the structure, a place where collapse had become access. Ahead, the path narrowed. Walkways crossed at uneven angles. Rails, ladders, broken lifts, and transport tubes spiraled away into dark apertures. The map had called this crust level, Quadrant 3v1.56. "We follow the pass until the ventilation split," Marcy said. "Brask, do you smell anything we should worry about?" He grunted. "Not yet. But Monk should be ready, yes? Do compass things and lead us." I nodded despite myself not knowing what Brask meant at all. My hands adjusted the pistol at my hip. Not ready. But preparing. We stepped forward together into Parthosia. Chapter 6, The Wilderness. From the nexus of walkways, I understood why my stomach had dropped during the descent. The ledge we'd been standing on wasn't a cliff at all. It was the sheared lip of some massive architectural fracture, a collapsed structure pretending to be solid ground. As we moved down onto the level below, the illusion dissolved. We had been standing on wreckage. Broken girders, shattered wall face, rebar sprouting like bristles from a cracked porcelain plate the size of a cathedral floor. The scale tricked the eye. There was no up or down here. Only direction relative to collapse. My head reeled from the motion, not because I was moving, but because the world was. Walkways spiderwebbed in every direction, some dipping, others twisting into vertical spirals that made no structural sense. Ladders led to walls, ramps ended in midair, and stairs reversed direction halfway through their run as if built for another kind of locomotion. There were angles here that didn't belong in the human eye. Brask and Marcy walked without hesitation, but I had to will each step into place, grounding myself with deliberate balance. Brask tightened his pack and let out a low grunt. "We must go, yes? Do not want to attract the things that live on the walls." He moved off down one of the walkways with long, rolling strides. Marcy nodded once and followed without a word. I took one last look over the edge before moving. What I had thought was floor opened into layer after layer of cavernous void. Below us was not solid ground but endless levels, decks, platforms, substructures, and voids. Some shone with flickering lights. Others oozed a dull bioluminescence. Many were dark. And beneath even those, I saw holes. Shafts without bottom. A recursion of abyss. There was no base layer. Just more. I realized I was lagging. Brask's voice floated back over his shoulder. "Come, Monk. Less gawking, yes? Night here is hard." The light made everything worse. It wasn't even illumination in the proper sense. The whole landscape was overexposed in high-contrast bleeding washes, like an old film reel projected at full brightness with no screen. Buildings shimmered with heat differentials. Metal warped and flashed as we passed. Every motion cast long false shadows that jittered and blurred. It felt like moving through a dream made by German expressionists. We passed junction after junction. Narrow bridges fused from mesh and melted slag. Corridors grown from cables and something like biocrete. Arches of carved stone that ended in piles of trash and rot. The deeper we went, the more I knew this place had no singular design. Not even a bad design, it was all just collision. As if every competing vision of structure had been layered atop one another until they collapsed onto their own contradictions. And it wasn't dead. Rot and rust clung to the walls like lichen. Fungal blooms with metallic threads pulsed faintly when we passed. Pipes bent to allow for new growth. Cables reached out from holes, like antennae testing the air. The dirt wasn't dirt. It was a mulch of decay. Organic and synthetic both. Peeling labels. Chitin. Plastic pulp. Glass worn down to powder. Things that shouldn't have mixed, but did. And from it, life grew. Moss, if it could be called that, ran black and gray with occasional glimmers of deep oil blue. It had a smell like antiseptic and mold. Everywhere I looked, I saw statues. Some looked carved, some printed, some broken beyond recognition. All of them are wrong. Either too tall or too small. Limbs out of proportion. Faces melted or blurred or turned inwards. Some seemed frozen mid-motion, half stepping out of walls or columns, only to be captured and consumed by the next generation of structural growth. Entire clusters of them leaned in a silent scream as ivy strangled their necks and girders punctured their spines. This was not a world where intelligent design applied. This was a place where existence warred against itself. Brask and Marcy kept moving. The walkways tilted again, angling us slower through a crooked corridor flanked by broken support ribs. I could feel the weight of the city and layers above us pressing down. Not just physical. Psychological. The longer we walked, the more the ceiling seemed to droop, sag, breathe. "How much farther to the vent split?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse. Marcy pointed ahead with her chin. "Through the teeth." I didn't know what that meant until we passed under it. A massive archway shaped like the open maw of some metal beast. Jagged steel had been curled back and blackened at the tips, as if it had been melted by some interior pressure. Or forced open from within. Brask spat once at its base and made a gesture I didn't recognize. "Bad place. Bad death." Marcy kept her eyes forward. "That was from the corporation purge 2 years ago. Don't stare too long. We've got to keep moving." Beyond the teeth was a downward slope, one of the few steady inclines we'd encountered so far. Brask dropped to a crouch as he led, one hand brushing the rail, the other never far from his belt. "Monk," he said without looking back, "this is still city, yes? But things change quick. Keep your eyes, not just your feet." I nodded and scanned the edges. Cracks in the walls. Vents that pulsed open and shut like gills. A flicker behind a grating that might have been light. Might have been eyes. Then we reached the vent split. It wasn't a crossroads so much as a cavity. A broad junction where multiple ducts converged and burst. Metal shredded and peeled back like a fruit rind. From it poured a steady hiss of warm, coppery air. The moss was thick here, almost white in places, and the ground squelched underfoot. Marcy stepped carefully, her boots finding the dry patches with practiced ease. "We'll camp here tonight. Only one entrance and it got good visibility. Nothing should come up the vent while it breathes. Brask, can you sweep the tunnels just in case?" Brask nodded and vanished into one of the side routes without a word. I stood there, blinking into the haze, unsure where to place myself. Marcy turned to me and offered half a smile. Marcy said, "Let's strike the tent and bury the food. If we want to go farther tomorrow, that will matter. Any wait beyond drinking water makes it hard to bring enough food back." I agreed, and we set to work. We kept our voices low. Not whispered and not afraid, just measured. Cautious. Marcy, in particular, never let her tone rise above what the strange acoustics of Parthosia might echo. Once Brask hung our good food pack off an overhang where nothing could get it, or so he claimed. When we came back, it was covered in these moth things. You know what a moth is, right? It's one of those odd things that flutters around lamps in the city. Anyway, they were the size of Brask's fist. The sack was ruined. Not to mention we had to go 2 days back without eating. You should have seen the captain chewing him out. She chuckled, a quiet thing, almost breathless. Not joyless, but tempered. They were upset about just a pack? I asked, surprised. I had started to assume the church only cared about us in abstract. Marcy's face changed. Not quite bitter, not quite sad. Just honest. The church thinks we aren't worth the stuff we're given. I hear the Puritans are upset we get robes. The perverts. I blinked. The honesty caught me off guard. My mouth moved before I thought. I'm sure Lucidias would love to see what's under Brask's robes. Marcy's eyebrows shot up. Then she laughed. A real one, too. It shook her shoulders. She caught herself and covered her mouth, eyes starting to the tunnels. Is that your first joke, Everett? You are starting to fit in. We'd finished camouflaging the lean-to with the rag we called a tent. It didn't look like much, just some draped fabric and debris hidden in the gray moss, but when we stepped back, it melted into the landscape. Marcy nodded. Good work, Everett. Brask returned not long after. His ears twitched, and he sniffed the air before speaking. I smelled no tracks, yes. I cannot wait till Monk learns to use compass, he sighed and adjusted the strap across his chest. Scouting is fine, but I do not like the smell here. Yeah, Marcy said. You prefer sewer stench. Brask gave her a look. His ears flattened slightly at the insult, but he didn't respond. Probably because it was Marcy. Come. We patrol around camp. Captain will expect our report on vent camp's safety. So let us go, yes? We moved out together, back into the breathing metal wilds. I followed a step behind, trying not to let my eyes wander too far from the path Marcy took, but it was impossible not to stare. The walkways split in every direction I could think of, up, down, sideways, through. Metal arches formed ribbed tunnels that narrowed and widened like breathing passages. Overhead, cables hung like vines, some thick as tree trunks, others gossamer thin and gently humming. I passed beneath one that shivered at our movement and gave off a scent like hot copper and bruised fruit. The walls breathed. Not in the poetic sense literally. Some heaved gently under our hands when we steadied ourselves. I brushed one that thumped like a slowed heartbeat. Off to the right, an entire corridor was sealed with netting spun from something fibrous and chitinous. Beyond it, I saw flickering motion. Not human. Nothing here seemed made for humans. The scale was wrong. Every archway was too tall, every railing too high or too low. It felt like we were borrowing from a place that belonged to someone else. We did a wide circle around the area the camp was set up in. A forest of pillars opened ahead, each column carved with patterns that repeated in fractal loops, none of them matching. They were etched deep into the surfaces, some curling into runes, others resembling chewed pathways of termites. Between them, the light stung my eyes cold and pale and sharp, like filtered starlight through bleach. The high contrast made every silhouette harsh. No shadows fell clean. They broke across surfaces like oil spills. Marcy slowed her pace. Brask was already well ahead, his steps confident even as the floor sloped into a cracked lattice of what might once have been a ventilation grid. I saw entire pipeworks crushed under the weight of later structures. Above, somewhere far above, there was a metal groan that didn't echo, it simply lingered, as if it hadn't finished yet. This place wasn't designed, it was inflicted. And we were ants in multiple gods' discarded blueprints. We circled wide. The patrol looped out through strata of fused structures and wastes-scape that blurred the line between shelter and hazard. Broken buildings were sunk halfway into one another, rooms split mid-wall, staircases twisted like tendons. Almost every hallway became a cliffside, every overlook a dizzying guess at what held us up. Rusted signage jutted out of bent supports in letters I didn't know. Hollow pipes ran through rotted beams, then bled into hardened roots that looked like veins with rebar bones. Light filtered down from nowhere. The infernal white cast rays through slits in the walls above, lighting up volumes of space we never meant to see. I watched as a shaft of it burned across a sheet of filamentous lichen. The patch curled back on itself and hissed, like paper catching fire in slow motion. None of us talked for a while. It wasn't the quiet of reverence. It was the stillness that came when your body focused on balance, not words. Every step needed testing. Every walkway had to be read like scripture. We found no fresh tracks. Brask sniffed again and finally exhaled, unsatisfied. I got the feeling he wanted to be wrong. Eventually, we circled back. The lean-to looked exactly as we left it, tucked into a natural divot where a mass of grey mosses had been piled. From a distance, it was indistinguishable from the surrounding decay. "I will take first watch, yes? Monk will take the middle?" Brask asked, but it wasn't directed at me. "Yeah, that works for me. I prefer mornings to nights," Marcy answered. It was decided. There was no room to argue, and I didn't want to. My body had finally caught up with the tension I'd been carrying all day. I slid into the ragged lean-to and tried to get comfortable on the flattened moss. Sleep came fast, and heavy. It didn't last. A gentle nudge at my shoulder pulled me out of it. Brask leaned close, his breath slow, eyes dark with fatigue. "Monk," he whispered. It was barely audible. He pressed something small into my hand. "Cold. Round. Keep this. It vibrates when your watch is over. Only you will feel it." I nodded, still half asleep, and accepted it. The device was the size of a coin, but heavier. I tucked it into my sleeve and eased out of the lean-to. Night in Parthosia was a different kind of dark. Not the absence of light, but the wrongness of it. Colors bled strange in low light. Depth warped. The columns we had walked through earlier now looked skeletal, and the wind that passed through the vent near us sang oddly. I kept my back to the lean-to, crouched low in the moss and decay. Time passed slowly. The god rays had dimmed entirely. Their fire no longer licked the edges of the walkways. There was no warmth. At some point, I felt it. Not a noise, not a shadow. Just an odd pressure that came from within myself. A weight that pressed inward from the dark. I stared across the vented walkways toward the webbing I had seen earlier. Something was there. The sensation coiled around the back of my neck like breath. I held still. Waited. But the moment passed. It left as it came, without explanation. I didn't move for the rest of the watch. The puck in my sleeve finally buzzed, and I rose to wake Marcy. I wanted to speak, to say what I thought I'd felt, but my mouth stayed shut. What I really wanted was the light to come back. When I awoke the next morning, it was to Brask and Marcy silently breaking bread inside the lean-to. Brask caught my movement and raised a hand in greeting, then placed a finger over his muzzle in a hush before tossing me a wrapped ration. It landed near my chest, speckled with bits of debris. I still couldn't bring myself to call the loam-like mixture dirt. It had more in common with powdered rust and ash than anything soil-based. We chewed slowly, not talking, and when we finished we buried the wrappers under a nearby overhang. Only after we'd walked far enough from camp that it no longer lingered in sight did Brask finally speak. "Eating outside is dangerous, yes? Things have noses better than my own." He adjusted the strap of his pack and turned toward the rising heat and haze. "Our goal this week is hunting, yes? Though we might end up just gathering. Well, let's go, no time to waste." He moved like a pulled string, no room for slack. Marcy offered me an apologetic smile and tilted her head after him. "He's always like this on gathering missions." "Hunting mission?" Brask called from a dozen steps ahead. Marcy rolled her eyes. "He just wants meat. We have standing orders to bring something back, so sometimes we end up picking mushrooms." "No mushrooms this week, yes. We will eat meats." That got a laugh out of all of us, the tension from the night finally shaken loose. The humor warmed the early march as we pressed into the crust plains of the sector. The climb and descent were endless. Stairs rotted or stopped mid-air. Bridges became ribbons of half-fused material that had to be crossed on hands and knees. Brask knew the way. Or maybe he just moved forward with enough conviction that none of us questioned it. At each ledge, he secured a rope and we rappelled down, leaving a trailing path behind us. "We bring them back on the final trip, yes?" he said after the third descent. Only then did I begin to truly wonder how heavy Brask's pack was. After 2 hours of slow vertical travel, I noticed the light shifting ahead. Not just a general increase, but a focused, harsh brilliance like a sunbeam bent through broken glass. One of the god rays, thick and solid as a pillar, filtered down through the strata of structure far above. And it was massive. A full 2 miles in diameter, touching down on this layer like a spotlight from heaven or hell. The field it illuminated looked like nothing I had seen on Terra or Earth. It was beautiful. Alien, but beautiful. Moss grew thick and tall, nearly to the neck in some places. Long stalks sprouted from the base of each cluster, bobbing gently in winds that drifted from slashed ductwork and yawning vents. It was not green. There was no true color in this light. The whole plain was cast in brutal monochrome, stark blacks, washed whites, and 1,000 shades of silver in between. But the pollen on the stalks caught the light as it fell. It shimmered, suspended in the shifting breeze, a storm of motes like frozen snow and burnt gold. Brask had already unlatched his pack and withdrawn a pair of batons. At first they looked like children's toys, until he gripped his and extended it with a flick. It snapped outward in segments until it became a full spear. It reminded me of those gag magic wands back on Earth, the kind that popped open in cheap stage shows, but this was no joke. He handed one to me. I shook my head and gestured to the coil pistol strapped at my hip. "No, Monk," Brask whispered, suddenly serious. "We don't want to ring the dinner bell. Guns are for emergencies, yes?" Marcy had already pulled her robes tight, shielding herself from the exposure of the god ray. She met my gaze and tilted her chin, a silent agreement. Brask was right. I took the baton. It was cold in my palm, light but solid. The weight already made me miss Brask's training in the gym. When I squeezed, it telescoped out with a soft hiss, the point sharpening to a carbon glint edge. We stepped into the light. The change was immediate. Heat rose in waves off the metal beneath the moss. Each step squelched slightly, but there was no water, only the dense oozing compression of plant life grown in impossible conditions. The air was sweet and thick, full of fragrant rot and ozone. I could feel my heart beating against my ribs, slow but heavy. Marcy moved ahead, her spear low, her robe swaying around her boots. Brask took the lead with the ease of someone who had done this more times than he cared to count. Inside the moss, the world disappeared. The field looked flat from above, but within it was like navigating the inside of a moving crowd. Stalks whispered against fabric and skin, brushing my neck, my arms, occasionally my face. Every now and then, I caught sight of a darker patch, something blackened and sun-scorched, a ring of melted moss where God Ray had focused too sharply. In those zones, the stalks had turned to ash. The pollen continued to fall. I tried to breathe through my sleeve. We moved slowly, deliberately. Brask stopped often, sniffing the air, ears twitching. Once, he raised his hand, and we froze. A flicker of motion crossed the field ahead. Not wind. Something with mass. Something hunched and quick. It vanished into the haze of white. Marcy glanced back at me with excitement gleaming in her eyes, mouthing the word, "game." Brask nodded once and we advanced. There was no trail to follow, no footprints in moss. But Brask read something I could not, maybe heat, maybe scent. We moved toward the motion, and I readied the spear like a week of training was enough to make me good with it. My legs burned. My shoulders ached. We had marched for hours and were now stalking through a sun-blasted trap, armed with weapons I barely understood. And still, I followed. In the moss, every sound felt too loud. Each breath, each shift of weight, seemed to echo upward toward the Godray and outward into the silent field. I copied Brask's movements as best I could, matching each cautious step, each pause. It wasn't just about being quiet, it was about maximizing efficiency. Brask moved like the ground was part of him. I moved like a guest. He led. Marcy followed. I took the rear, trying to keep the stalks from rustling. Up ahead, there was motion. Not wind. Not gravity. It was something alive, shifting purposefully between the spires of moss. Brask halted, holding up a fist. His fur caught the light, tips curling as the heat brushed against them. We froze. I squinted through the haze. The creature was there, just shapes and outlines at first. Then, clarity. It stood chest high to a grown man and moved like it weighed nothing at all. Four thin legs held up a long, narrow torso, the spine bending with a liquid ease. Its head ended in a long beak, flanked by two tendrils that flicked and twitched in the air, testing for scent or heat. From its back rose a sail of high netted fins ribbed with flexible struts. Filaments trailed from its edge, fluttering in the shifting air like strands of jellyfish. In shadow, it looked like matte slate. But as the Godray caught it, light lanced through the sail, and I saw its veins, a web of red threads pulsing faintly. It shimmered along the ribs, almost transparent. It fed in the light, standing motionless beneath the Godray as the filaments danced. Brask didn't wait. He dropped his stance and lunged. His spear cut forward, a blur of practiced violence. The creature turned, faster than I thought possible, and sidestepped with a spring-loaded hop that left only a ripple in the moss. I reacted on instinct. I charged with my spear raised like in training, aiming for the body. But my foot caught on a patch of uneven ground, a shallow pocket of collapsed moss, slick with heat damp, hidden under the growth. My weight shifted, too far forward. I stumbled. The creature turned in the same instant. It didn't flee. It struck. One of its stilt-like legs lashed out in a whip-crack motion, catching me across the chest. I barely had time to raise my arm before the impact knocked me clean off my feet. I hit the moss hard and skidded, the spear flying from my grip. Air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. I tried to scramble up, but the creature was already above me. The beak jabbed downward and Brask was there, intercepting it mid-strike. His spear sank into the creature's flank, twisting hard, and it screamed, and the sound that was drawn out didn't come from a mouth but vibrated through its sail like a rattling string of wind chimes. It reared back, staggering, and Brask stabbed again, this time aiming for the leg joint. The blow landed, but not deep enough. The creature bolted with a limping, spiraling gait, blood trailing like smoke through the god ray. Marcy moved to help me as I sat up, coughing. "You all right?" I nodded, but shame prickled hotter than the bruises. My eyes met Brask's. He was breathing hard. "It is gone, yes?" he said, lowering his spear. I started, but he waved a hand. "No sorries. You tried. It was good enough. This time, we lost, yes?" Marcy helped me to my feet. "We'll get the next one." We regrouped again, this time slower, quieter. The moss swayed like nothing had happened. But my ribs throbbed, and I gripped the spear tighter. Not a complete failure, but closer than I ever wanted to be to one. Marcy smiled and clapped my shoulder. "You got closer than I did. And we know they're here now. That's the important part." We regrouped, and I glanced back once toward where the creature had vanished. I could still feel the twitch of the spear in my grip, the miss. Not a failure, it was a lesson. That's what I keep telling myself, anyway. I adjusted the spear in my hands, tightened the strap of my robe, and followed them deeper into the moss. Sweat clung to every fold of my robes as we pushed deeper through the moss. There was no breeze, no reprieve, only the stinging white heat and the slow burn of shame in my chest. We hadn't seen another of the creatures since the first one vanished into the bloom, but the silence didn't comfort me. If anything, it sharpened the guilt. I felt the weight of it with every squelching step. Brask led us in a slow zigzagging pattern, nose low, ears twitching. I recognized the signs now. He was tracking. Or trying to. Every so often he would pause, sniff, grunt, then change course. Marcy followed close, her robe pulled tight against the slashing light. I brought up the rear and tried not to fall behind. Eventually, we came across a strange bulging structure, something like a collapsed dome. The surface was cracked and pitted, half consumed by rust and heat, but the opening was clear enough. A perfect shelter. Brask stopped at the edge and sniffed again. No bad spores. No droppings. "It is safe enough, yes?" Marcy crouched to peer inside. "Cooler in there. Might as well take a break before the next loop." The three of us ducked into the shade of the malformed shell. Inside, it smelled of dust and a dry, bitter fungus flaking off the walls in crumbling curls. Pale orange spores drifted slowly through the stale air, but Brask didn't seem alarmed, so I followed their lead. We drank in silence for a minute. Brask passed out the ration flasks, each one wrapped in mesh to keep the rubber from melting. My hands trembled slightly as I unscrewed mine. I hadn't realized how much my shoulders ached. I broke the silence first, my voice lower than I expected. "What was that thing?" Brask sat cross-legged, tail flicking. "Ah. A glass horn sail beast, yes. At least, that is what I call them. I have seen 3, now 4. Always near mossfields. They eat the light, I think. Not like plants, though. They siphon it. You saw the sail. It shimmered like glass," I said. "And the filaments, those were alive?" "Very alive," Brask said. "Tasting the air. Listening. I think they are old. Not city-made. Native." Marcy took a sip of her flask, then leaned back against the inner wall. "They don't usually attack. At least, they didn't before. That one didn't bolt until you stumbled." I nodded, already shrinking under my own memory. "I should have hit it. I was close." Brask shrugged. "You were. It saw you. That is enough. Next time, less stumble, more stab, yes?" "That was your version of comforting," Marcy said dryly. Brask smirked. "He lived. That is comfort." Marcy shifted and brushed some loose flakes of fungus from her sleeve. "He means we've all messed up. Don't let it inside. Gullet slows you." Brask missed a kill once and dropped his spear into a waste chute. "I got it back," Brask said indignantly. "After we pulled you out by the tail," she added. A smile cracked across my face despite myself. I hadn't realized how tight my jaw had been clenched until that moment. "Do you think we'll see more of them?" I asked. "Yes," Brask said immediately. "This is their feeding cycle. Godre is strong. They gather. Maybe more at dusk. The trick is not to get seen." "We didn't make much noise," I said. "Noise is not only sound, yes?" Brask replied. "It is heat. Movement, smell, thought. Some of these things out here they feel in other ways. Ways no person can. The sail beasts feel wind differently. They know when it is wrong. When it carries breath or sweat. Marcy scratched at a scab on her forearm and tossed her flask into her pack. It means we wait for dusk. Change positions. Try again. If you're up for it. I am, I said. Not because I felt brave, but because I couldn't let my failure sit. Brask stood with a stretch, ears brushing the inside curve of the dome. Then we wait. The light outside shifted slightly. Still too bright to move. The white haze lanced through a tear in the upper wall and cast a prism through the flakes of fungus. My heartbeat had finally slowed, but it would never be slow enough to forget how easily I had fallen. I gripped the haft of my spear again, just to remember the weight. When Brass crouched by the entrance again and sniffed the air, I was already on my feet. We gathered our things. I gripped my spear and followed. The light outside had shifted again, casting softer streaks through the breaks in the upper superstructure. Not dark yet, but the angle of the god rays had lost their noon harshness. We moved quietly, single file, ears open. No one spoke. There was a solemnity to the rhythm of our steps. Brask led us down a slow spiral path carved into a plate seam. Moss covered most of it. Each footfall left a shallow imprint in the spongy biomass, and each breath I took came with a damp, almost vegetal burn. No sign of the sail beasts. Not even a whisper. That didn't soothe me. After half an hour, we stopped beneath a drooping arch where a shattered cable stay had slumped against an old security gantry. The hollow between them formed a kind of pocket, an alcove overgrown with ribbony lichens and a base layer of tangled black moss. It wasn't much, but it was shaded and shielded from most directions. Good enough to talk without risking too much of an echo. Brask pulled a sealed pouch from his pack and tapped it twice against the rail. The seal popped with a dull hiss. He handed out dried strips of protein loaf. I took mine without comment and chewed. Time passed, and I tried to think through what I wanted to ask. I still had a few bundles of ritual supplies stashed with my survival gear. A narrow band of etching paste. After eating I pulled one of the pendulums from my satchel and held it up. I brought these, I said, keeping my voice low. I thought maybe we could try a tracking ritual or maybe draw something in. It was part of the initiation kit. Brask took it and turned it over in his fingers. His nose twitched. I have no idea what this is. He scoffed. Maybe useful. But also dangerous, yes? You want to bait a beast with a trinket? Marcy leaned over to look. What kind of ritual is it? I think it's a tracking seal. I don't really know how to activate it. It was just in my kit. Could be useful, she said. Could also bring half a dozen things we don't want. Exactly, Brask muttered. I stuffed the cloth back into my satchel. While we're talking, I said, trying to pivot, can I ask something else? Brask and Marcy both looked over. The timer. In our minds. When I was first injected, it was counting down, but now it's counting up. What's up with that? They exchanged glances. Marcy made a shrugging motion. Brask answered first. Our bodies are changing. There is a time limit until the change requires more fuel. The countdown is your crisis. The count up is your digestion. I groaned internally. So I have to get another injection? They both nodded, almost in unison. Neither looked pleased. Marcy frowned and picked at the dirt crusted along her nails. Most think it's the maximum amount of time your body has to fully understand the first Gnosis dose. Like the progress bar. As your system intakes it, learns it, it climbs. But there's a downside. There is? She nodded. Her voice was quiet. Some actions take time off the top. The Gnosis doesn't like everything. It has preferences. It's alive. Brask nodded along. If you fight it, it eats time. If you do something it hates, it punishes you. That is why some of us end up rushed into the next stage. Yes? I thought about Ka'uru's ruined lungs, his grayed skin, the slump of his back and the whirl of his eye lenses. I thought about the faces of the other crown bearers at Horus Yard. None of them looked whole. So how do I know what it wants? Another shrug. Brask made a low grunt of irritation. Whatever moves the bar, yes? That is all we know. I sighed. Is there an average? Like, how long until someone has to take the next dose? Marcy finally looked up from her gear. Her eyes searched the empty space above us. 6 months for Crown 1, most say. Then it doubles after that. Supposedly. But it varies. Great, I muttered. What a great game. Game? They both said at once. I shook my head, frustrated. Obelisk Systems told me it was a game. They hooked me with a survey, some language about research and job aptitude. Said it would be like a trial run for a new kind of simulation. They even showed me a loading screen. And then they locked the chair and jabbed the needle. The whole system feels fake, like something built to look like a game, only the consequences are real. Marcy broke the tension. She leaned back and stretched her arms over her head. You want to know how I got mine? My injection? I nodded. She stared out past the alcove. My parents sold me. Not to the church. To a corp. One of the MedVenture ones. I don't know if they needed the money or if they just wanted a cleaner house. I was maybe 7. They tagged me as a candidate and sent me out to an off-grid lab near Tharsis Rim. I stayed there until I was 14. They called it research, but it was mostly vivisection. Brask looked away. He said nothing. Marcy sniffed. One day they said I was ready. They brought out the vial and the silver chair and locked me in. I don't remember much else. I woke up 3 days later in a slurry tank. No pulse. No heartbeat. But I was alive. I swallowed, unsure of what to say. They dumped me at a city port station when the funding ran dry. The church picked me up. I've been theirs ever since. Brask's voice came next. Soft, guttural. My tribe lived in the sewer stacks beneath the city sectors. We kept the sump gates moving and managed flood flow for the upper tiers. Those were inherited jobs and they were illegal, yes. The statutes forbade alien, non-citizen labor in municipal systems, but everyone looked away because the water had to move. A compliance drone came. Foolishly we shot it. 2 days later the tunnel mouths collapsed and the air ducts filled with foam. Corporate security arrived in suits with harvest tranquilizers. They took the young and burned what they could not carry. He paused, breathing once through his nose. I was the only one who lived through the trials. That is why I became cohort. I nodded slowly. For a while, no one spoke. The moss nearby bent gently in the fading light. The silence wasn't awkward. It was something else. The kind of stillness that forms between people marked by the same pain. We keep walking, Brask said finally. Keep changing. It's the only way forward. I nodded. It wasn't enough. But it was true. We stood and gathered our things. The light outside had tilted again, and the edge of the godray was climbing the wall across from us. Time to move. I checked my mental timer. The counter had ticked up another hour. I didn't know if that was good or bad.